The emergency room went dead silent when the gunman's body hit the floor. 3 precise shots, no hesitation, no wasted movement. Then Dr. Marcus Holt turned around and saw who was holding the weapon. It was Sarah Bennett, the nurse he'd spent 3 months trying to fire. The one he'd called incompetent in front of the entire staff. The one who supposedly couldn't handle pressure. She stood there, breathing steady, eyes cold as winter steel, while 6 tactical operators in full combat gear stormed through the doors and stopped dead when they saw her. The team leader's face went pale. "Go 6, Haas. We thought you were retired." Sarah didn't lower her weapon. "I was, be calm. If you want to see how the most underestimated woman in medicine became the person everyone feared, stay with me until the end. Like this video, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels." 3 months earlier, Sarah Bennett had walked into Mercy Ridge Hospital in Clearwater, Arizona, carrying a single duffel bag and a resume that looked suspiciously thin for someone her age. The HR director, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Voss, had stared at the paperwork for a long time before finally signing off. "You come from a military background," Patricia said, not quite asking. "Rehabilitation services," Sarah answered. Her voice was quiet, controlled. "Stateside work mostly." That wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. Sarah had learned a long time ago that some truths needed to stay buried. The hospital itself was a sprawling facility that served the entire county, handling everything from routine procedures to major trauma. Clearwater sat near enough to Interstate 10 that they got their share of highway accidents, and close enough to the desert that heat stroke and dehydration kept the ER busy during summer months. It was the kind of place where good nurses were always in demand and questions about your past didn't get asked too loudly, as long as you showed up on time. Sarah showed up early. She worked double shifts when asked. She never complained about assignments. She kept her head down and her mouth shut, which should have made her invisible in the best possible way. Instead, it made her a target. Dr. Marcus Holt noticed her first. He was the kind of doctor who wore his credentials like armor. Johns Hopkins Medical School, Trauma Surgery Fellowship at Mass General, published research in 3 major journals. He'd come to Mercy Ridge 2 years ago after what people whispered was a situation at his previous hospital in California, though nobody seemed to know the details. What everyone did know was that Marcus Holt expected perfection and had exactly 0 tolerance for weakness. "Bennett," he'd snapped during her 2nd week, "you're slow on the intubation setup. We're running a code, not a tea party." Sarah had finished prepping the equipment without looking up. "Tube's ready, doctor." 3 seconds too late. 3 seconds means brain damage. You want that on your conscience? She'd handed him the laryngoscope without comment. That became the pattern. No matter what Sarah did, Marcus found fault. She was too slow, too hesitant, too quiet. She didn't assert herself enough in emergencies. She double-checked equipment that didn't need checking. She asked too many questions about patient histories before procedures. "She's got that combat vet paranoia," Marcus said one afternoon in the break room, loud enough for half the staff to hear. "Always looking for threats that aren't there. It's pathological." Nurse Linda Cho had laughed, not quite kindly. Maybe she should have stayed in whatever rehab program they pulled her from. Sarah had been standing just outside the break room door with a patient chart in her hands. She'd stood there for 5 seconds, absorbing the words, then turned around and walked back to the nurse's station without saying anything. She'd learned in places far uglier than this hospital that defending yourself just made things worse. Better to be invisible. Better to let them think they were right. But invisibility was harder than it sounded. During a mass casualty drill in week 4, Sarah had frozen completely when the practice alarm went off. It was supposed to simulate a multi-vehicle accident with 8 incoming trauma patients. The sound system blasted recordings of sirens, screaming, shouting, all carefully designed to create realistic stress conditions. Sarah's hands had locked around the crash cart handle. Her breathing went shallow. For 10 full seconds, she didn't move while nurses rushed past her and doctors barked orders. When she finally snapped out of it, Marcus was standing 3 feet away with his arms crossed, looking at her like she'd just confirmed every suspicion he'd ever had. "You're a liability," he said flatly. "I'm documenting this." He did. The incident report went into her file with Marcus's recommendation that she be placed on probation pending psychiatric evaluation. Sarah signed the paperwork without argument, her handwriting neat and controlled even though her pulse was hammering so hard she could feel it in her teeth. That night, alone in her small rental house on the edge of Clearwater, Sarah sat in the dark with a cup of coffee going cold in her hands. The house was furnished with the bare minimum: a couch, a bed, a table. No pictures on the walls, no personal items visible except for a single duffel bag in the closet that she never unpacked. She always sat facing the door, always kept her phone within arm's reach, always listened to the sound of her neighbors coming and going, cataloging their patterns without consciously meaning to. Old habits didn't die, they just went underground. The helicopter sounds were worst. Mercy Ridge was a level 2 trauma center, which meant they had a helipad for critical transfers. Every time the rotors started up, something in Sarah's chest pulled tight. Her hands would curl into fists, her eyes would track the windows, looking for movement that shouldn't be there, threats that no longer existed. Nobody noticed. Or if they did, they just added it to the running list of reasons Sarah Bennett didn't belong at Mercy Ridge Hospital. By month 2, the situation had deteriorated into something uglier than simple workplace friction. Marcus had built a careful case against her, documenting every hesitation, every moment of uncertainty, every time she double-checked something other nurses would have skipped. He'd recruited Linda Cho as his primary witness, and Linda had proven enthusiastic about the role. "She's weird," Linda told anyone who'd listen. "She doesn't socialize, doesn't talk about her past. I asked her once if she had family, and she just stared at me like I'd threatened her." The overnight shift supervisor, a veteran nurse named Greg Paulson, who'd worked at Mercy Ridge for 15 years, was one of the few people who didn't join the pile-on. "Leave her alone," Greg said during one particularly vicious break room session. "She does her work. She doesn't cause problems. What more do you want?" "I want to know she won't collapse during a real emergency," Marcus shot back. "And right now, I have zero confidence in that." Greg had looked at Sarah, who was restocking supplies in the corner with her back to the conversation, and frowned. "You ever think maybe she's been through enough already without us making it worse?" "That's not my problem," Marcus said. "My problem is patient safety." The irony was that Sarah's patient outcomes were flawless. She'd worked dozens of shifts without a single complaint from patients or families. She caught medication errors before they happened. She noticed subtle changes in vital signs that less experienced nurses missed. Her documentation was meticulous. None of that mattered. Marcus Holt had decided she was incompetent, and he had the authority to make that judgment stick. The breaking point came during a Tuesday night shift in the 10th week. The ER was relatively quiet, a few minor injuries, one elderly patient with chest pain, a kid with a possible broken arm from a skateboarding accident. Sarah was doing routine checks when the ambulance bay doors crashed open and paramedics rushed in with a patient on a gurney. "Gunshot wound to the abdomen," the lead paramedic shouted. 23-year-old male, BP dropping, he's circling the drain." Behind them, 4 men in dark suits and tactical gear swept into the ER like a storm front. "Everyone stay back," one of them ordered, hand resting on a sidearm. "This patient is under federal protection." The ER erupted into controlled chaos. Marcus took charge immediately, barking orders while nurses scrambled to prep the trauma bay. Sarah moved to assist, muscle memory taking over, hands already reaching for equipment. Then one of the armed men turned around and locked eyes with her. He was older, maybe 50, with gray threading through dark hair and the kind of scars that told stories he'd never share. His expression went from professional alertness to complete shock in the span of a heartbeat. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice cracked on the word. "They told us you were discharged. They said you were out." Every person in the ER stopped moving. Marcus turned around, confusion written across his face. "You know this nurse?" The man didn't answer Marcus. He was staring at Sarah like he'd seen a ghost climb out of a grave. "Sergeant Major," Sarah said quietly. Her voice was different now, not the careful, subdued tone she used at the hospital. Something harder, something that carried weight. "I am out." "Then what the hell are you doing here?" "Working." The gunshot victim on the gurney let out a wet, rattling cough. Blood soaked through the bandages the paramedics had applied. Marcus snapped back to attention. "We need to move now," he said. "Bennett, prep the—" "Negative," the sergeant major cut him off. "Nobody touches this patient except cleared personnel." "This is a hospital, not a military base," Marcus said, voice rising. "That man will die without immediate intervention." Then you better hope your clearances are up to date. The next 20 minutes were a blur of coordinated chaos. The armed team locked down the entire ER wing while Marcus and two other surgeons worked to stabilize the patient. Sarah stayed back, following orders, watching the situation unfold with the kind of detached awareness that came from training most people never received. The sergeant major stayed close to her. "How long have you been here?" he asked under his breath. 3 months? Anyone know? No, he swore quietly. You were supposed to disappear completely. New identity, new life. This hospital doesn't have the security protocols for... I'm a nurse, Sarah interrupted. That's all I am now. That's not all you are. His eyes were sharp. That's not all you'll ever be. She didn't answer because there wasn't an answer that wouldn't be a lie. The patient stabilized enough for transport. The armed team moved him to a waiting helicopter with the kind of precision that suggested they'd done this 1,000 times before. The sergeant major paused at the ambulance bay doors, looking back at Sarah one more time. Stay sharp, he said. Then they were gone. Rotors beating the night air into submission, red lights disappearing into the desert darkness. The ER settled back into uneasy quiet. Marcus stood in the middle of the trauma bay, blood on his gloves, staring at Sarah with an expression she couldn't quite read. Suspicion, maybe. Confusion, definitely. Something else underneath that might have been the first crack in his absolute certainty. What was that about? He asked. Sarah stripped off her gloves and dropped them in the biohazard bin. Military patient. They have protocols. He called you something. What did he call you? Nothing important. Bennett. I need to restock the trauma bay, she said, brushing past him. Excuse me. She made it to the supply room before her hands started shaking. The next morning, hospital administrator Diane Cross called Sarah into her office. Diane was in her mid-50s, perfectly composed in a way that suggested she'd climbed every rung of the administrative ladder through sheer force of will and strategic ruthlessness. She sat behind her desk with Sarah's personnel file open in front of her. Dr. Holt has filed a formal complaint, Diane said without preamble. He believes you're unfit for duty and has requested your immediate termination. Sarah sat with her hands folded in her lap. I understand. Do you have anything to say in your defense? No, ma'am. Diane's eyebrows rose slightly. You're not going to fight this? Would it matter if I did? The administrator studied her for a long moment. Dr. Holt is one of our most respected physicians. His concerns carry significant weight. I understand, Sarah repeated. However, Diane continued, I'm not prepared to terminate you without due process. You'll be placed on administrative leave pending a full review. 2 weeks. During that time, we'll investigate Dr. Holt's claims and make a final determination. When do I leave? Immediately. Sarah stood, removed her ID badge from her scrubs, and placed it on the desk with the same care someone might use handling a live grenade. Thank you for the opportunity, she said. She walked out of Mercy Ridge Hospital at 10:30 on a Wednesday morning with her duffel bag over her shoulder and absolutely no plan for what came next. The Arizona sun hammered down on the parking lot like a physical weight. Her car was parked in the back corner, a decade-old sedan that she'd bought with cash and registered under her current name. She'd made it halfway across the lot when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but old instincts overruled common sense. Bennett? Sergeant Major wants you to know the patient from last night is stable, a clipped voice said. No introduction, no identification. Transfer was successful. Situation contained. That's good. He also wants you to know there's been chatter. Sarah stopped walking. What kind of chatter? The kind that suggests last night's incident wasn't isolated. Someone's asking questions about military medical personnel in civilian positions. We don't know if it's connected to you specifically, but I'm already on leave, Sarah said. I'm not a factor anymore. Ma'am, with respect, you're always a factor. The line went dead. Sarah stood in the parking lot holding her phone, feeling the weight of old decisions pressing down like the desert heat. She'd chosen this life specifically because it was supposed to be safe, quiet, anonymous. She was supposed to be just another nurse in just another hospital in just another forgettable town. That safety was an illusion, and she'd always known it. She got in her car and drove home to her empty house with its bare walls and unpacked duffel bag and all the pieces of a life she'd never actually allowed herself to build. The 2 weeks of administrative leave crawled past with the kind of slow, grinding inevitability of a coming storm. Sarah spent most of it at home, falling into routines that were probably unhealthy but felt comfortingly familiar. She ran 10 miles every morning in the desert heat. She practiced equipment drills with a medic kit she kept in her closet, muscle memory exercises that had nothing to do with civilian nursing and everything to do with keeping skills sharp that should have gone rusty years ago. She didn't socialize, didn't reach out to anyone from the hospital, didn't do anything except wait for the inevitable phone call telling her she was officially fired. It came on day 13. Ms. Bennett, this is Diane Cross. I'm calling to inform you that after careful review, we've decided to accept Dr. Holt's recommendation. Your employment with Mercy Ridge Hospital is terminated effective immediately. You'll receive your final paycheck and benefits information by mail within—
I understand, Sarah said. Thank you. She hung up before Diane could finish. There it was. 3 months of trying to build something normal, gone. Not that it mattered. She'd survived worse than unemployment. She'd survived things that would break most people's minds just to remember. She was still sitting on her couch, phone in hand, when the emergency alert came through.
Every device in the house started screaming at once. Phone, laptop, the television she rarely turned on. The alert banner flashed red across every screen. Active shooter incident, Mercy Ridge Hospital. Shelter in place. All units responding. Sarah's entire body went cold. She switched the TV to local news and watched the live helicopter feed showing police cars surrounding the hospital, people running from the building, ambulances lined up with nowhere to go because the hospital itself was under siege. The news anchor's voice was shaking. Multiple reports of armed individuals inside the building. We're hearing at least 3 gunmen, possibly more, carrying what witnesses describe as military-grade weapons. Police have established a perimeter, but cannot confirm. Sarah's phone rang again. Different number this time, but she recognized the pattern. Talk to me, she answered. The sergeant major's voice came through hard and clipped. The patient from 2 weeks ago was a witness in a black ops trial. Someone leaked his transfer route. The team that hit the hospital isn't random. They're contractors, probably ex-military, definitely professional. What do they want? To finish what they started. The patient died this morning from complications. They're inside Mercy Ridge looking for medical records. Anyone who treated him, anyone who might testify. Sarah's mind was already running calculations. Building layout, entry points, sight lines. The hospital doesn't have that kind of security. We know. We're 20 minutes out with a tactical response team, but 20 minutes is forever. I know. Silence stretched across the line for 3 seconds. There are civilians inside, Sarah said. Not asking, stating. Over 100. Patients, staff, visitors. The shooters have the ER locked down. They're working through the building methodically. Marcus Holt? Still inside, so is most of the day shift. Sarah closed her eyes, saw Linda Cho's face, Greg Paulson's concerned frown, all the people who'd ignored her or mocked her or just tried to survive their shifts without getting caught in the crossfire of Marcus Holt's vendetta. This isn't your fight anymore, the sergeant major said quietly. You're out. You deserve to stay out. Tell me you have someone closer than 20 minutes. I don't. Then it's my fight. She hung up and moved to her closet with the kind of speed that came from muscle memory drilled into bone. The duffel bag she'd never unpacked held everything she'd sworn she wouldn't need again. Tactical clothing, gear harness, a weapon she'd kept oiled and maintained even though she'd promised herself she'd never fire it outside a range. The insignia on the shoulder of her old uniform said, Medical, in faded letters. The patch underneath said Ghost 6. Sarah stripped off her civilian clothes and started pulling on pieces of a life she'd tried to leave behind. Black tactical pants, reinforced boots, a thin ballistic vest that wouldn't stop rifle rounds but might buy her an extra second. She checked her weapon with hands that didn't shake anymore, loaded 3 magazines and clipped them to her belt with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times in worse places than Arizona. Her phone buzzed one more time. Nightingale Protocol authorized. All units converge. ETA 18 minutes. 18 minutes. Sarah checked her watch, calculated distance and traffic, and knew with absolute certainty that people would die in those 18 minutes unless someone who knew what they were doing got inside that hospital right now. She grabbed her keys and headed for the door. The drive to Mercy Ridge took 7 minutes, with Sarah running every red light and pushing her sedan past any reasonable safety limit. She ditched the car 3 blocks out and covered the rest of the distance on foot, moving through side streets and alleys with the kind of tactical awareness that hadn't faded even after 3 years of trying to be normal. The hospital was chaos contained inside a police perimeter. Officers crouched behind squad cars, weapons drawn, but useless because nobody had clear intelligence on what was happening inside. The incident commander, a tired-looking cop with captain's bars, was arguing with a SWAT team leader about entry points when Sarah ghosted up behind them. "Backside delivery entrance is your best option," she said quietly. Both men spun around, hands moving toward weapons. Sarah raised her hands slowly, showing empty palms. "I worked here until yesterday. I know the building. The delivery entrance connects to a service corridor that bypasses the main ER. You can get a team inside without exposing them to the primary kill zones." The captain's eyes narrowed. "And you are someone who knows how to move through hostile territory without dying. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting. Are you going in or not?" The SWAT leader stepped closer, studying her with the kind of professional assessment that recognized gear when he saw it. "You're tactical." "I was." "How long?" "Long enough." He looked at the captain, who was clearly struggling with about 15 different protocol violations. "Sir, if she knows the building—" "Absolutely not," the captain said. "This is a police operation. I'm not sending civilians into—" The radio on his belt exploded with panicked voices. "Shots fired! Shots fired! They're executing hostages! We need entry now!" The captain's face went gray. Sarah looked at the SWAT leader and saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. He needed intelligence. He needed someone who knew the ground. He needed an edge that he didn't have. "I'm going in whether you authorize it or not," Sarah said. "Question is whether you want to coordinate with me or spend the next hour wondering why more people died than had to." The SWAT leader made his decision. "Captain, I'm taking responsibility for this." "Johnson." "Someone get her a radio," Johnson snapped. "Channel 7. You see something, you call it. You engage only if you have no other option. Clear?" "Clear." He tossed her a radio and an earpiece. Sarah clipped it on, tested the connection, and started moving before anyone could change their minds. The delivery entrance was exactly where she'd told them, a reinforced door at the back of the building that staff used for large supply shipments. Sarah bypassed the lock with a maintenance key she'd copied during her second week and never turned in. Old habits. The service corridor beyond was empty and dark. She moved through it like water, weapon up, clearing corners with the kind of efficiency that came from training in places where mistakes got you killed. The corridor connected to the main hospital through a series of access points that most staff didn't know existed. Sarah knew all of them. She could hear the chaos now, shouting, crying, the occasional crack of gunfire echoing through walls. Her radio crackled. "Go 6, this is Johnson. SWAT team is in position at north entrance. What's your status?" Sarah keyed her mic twice, the nonverbal signal for stand by. She reached the junction point where the service corridor met the main hospital and stopped cold. Through the small window in the access door, she could see into the ER waiting room, bodies on the floor, some moving, some not. 3 armed men in tactical gear sweeping through with military precision. One of them was shouting into a radio while the other 2 covered angles. And there, on the floor with his hands zip-tied behind his back and blood running from a cut on his forehead, was Marcus Holt. Sarah felt something cold and sharp crystallize in her chest. She keyed her radio. 3 shooters in the ER, armed with rifles, sidearms visible. They're looking for something specific, probably medical records related to the federal patient. Hostages on the ground, multiple injured. I'm going in. Negative, go 6. Wait for... Sarah switched off her radio and opened the door. The first shooter never saw her coming. Sarah moved through the doorway low and fast, using an overturned gurney for cover as she crossed the 10 feet of open space between the service corridor and the triage station. The shooter was focused on the hostages, rifle pointed at a cluster of terrified nurses huddled against the wall. His back was to her. Mistake. She closed the distance in 3 seconds, grabbed the rifle barrel with her left hand, and drove her right elbow into his kidney with enough force to drop him to his knees. His finger spasmed on the trigger, but Sarah had already redirected the barrel toward the ceiling. The burst went high, punching holes in acoustic tiles and raining dust down on everyone below. The second shooter spun toward the sound. Sarah used the first man's body as a pivot point, swinging him around and slamming him into a medicine cabinet hard enough to crack the glass. He went limp. She stripped his rifle in one smooth motion and brought it up just as the second shooter acquired her position. They fired simultaneously. His round caught the cabinet next to her head, spraying plastic and metal fragments across her cheek. Hers caught him center mass in the ballistic plate he was wearing, and the impact knocked him backward into a wheelchair that collapsed under his weight. Not a kill shot, but it bought her the 2 seconds she needed to close distance again. She kicked his rifle away and put her knee on his throat. "How many?" she said. He grabbed at her leg, trying to pull her off. She pressed down harder. "How many in the building?" "Go to hell," he choked out. Sarah glanced at the hostages. They were staring at her like she'd materialized out of thin air. Marcus was among them, zip ties cutting into his wrists, blood smeared across his face. His eyes were wide with something that might have been recognition or might have been shock. She looked back at the shooter under her knee. "You've got about 15 seconds before you lose consciousness. 10 before brain damage starts. Tell me how many or I'll let you find out what comes after 10. 6, he gasped. 6 total. 3 here, 3 upstairs. What floor? Second, surgical wing, looking for the... She didn't let him finish. Her elbow came down on his temple and he went slack. Sarah grabbed the zip ties from his belt and secured both unconscious men to a support column, then turned to face the hostages. 12 people total. Mostly staff, a few patients who'd been in the wrong place when the shooting started. All of them were staring at her like they couldn't quite process what they'd just witnessed. "Can you walk?" she asked the nearest nurse. The woman nodded mutely. "Then get everyone out through the service corridor behind me. Stay low, stay quiet. When you reach the exit, identify yourselves to the police. Tell them Ghost 6 is inside and there are 3 more shooters on the second floor. You understand?" Another nod. Sarah moved to Marcus and cut his zip ties with a knife she pulled from her belt. He jerked away from her like her touch burned. "You," he said. His voice came out hoarse. "You're leaving," Sarah interrupted. "And so are you. Get these people to safety." "What are you?" She met his eyes for the first time since cutting him loose. Saw the fear there, the confusion, the dawning realization that everything he'd believed about her was wrong in ways he couldn't begin to understand. "I'm what you needed me to be," she said. Then she was moving again, leaving Marcus and the hostages behind as she headed for the stairs. Behind her, she heard the shuffle of people getting to their feet, the whispered urgency of hospital staff trying to coordinate an evacuation in near silence. Good. They'd make it out. The service corridor was clear, and the police perimeter would catch them. Her job was the 3 shooters upstairs. The stairwell was a concrete shaft that amplified every sound into echoing chaos. Sarah took the steps 2 at a time, rifle up and ready, listening for any sign of movement above. The second floor was surgical, 4 operating rooms, 2 recovery bays, nurse stations at each end. High-value targets if you were looking for medical records or witnesses. She reached the landing and stopped. Through the small window in the stairwell door, she could see into the corridor beyond. 2 bodies on the floor, both wearing scrubs. One was moving weakly, trying to crawl toward a nurse station. The other wasn't moving at all. Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest. She keyed her radio, still off from earlier, switched it back on. "Johnson, this is Ghost 6. I'm on the second floor. 2 casualties visible, status unknown. 3 shooters are somewhere in the surgical wing. The ER is clear, and hostages are evacuating through the service corridor. Do not engage until I give you the all clear. Ghost 6, SWAT is ready to move. We can... Negative. These guys are professionals. You stack up in the hallways and they'll cut you apart. Let me draw them out. That's not protocol. Neither is what I'm about to do." She switched the radio off again before Johnson could argue. The door opened silently on hinges she'd oiled herself during her second month at Mercy Ridge. Another old habit. Always know your exits. Always keep them functional. Sarah stepped into the corridor and immediately dropped into a crouch behind a crash cart. The nurse who'd been crawling looked up at her with glazed eyes. "They went into OR 3, he whispered. Blood bubbled at the corner of his mouth. "Looking for something. I tried to stop them and..." "Don't talk," Sarah said. She pulled him behind the crash cart and did a quick assessment. Gunshot wound to the abdomen, left side. Entry wound only,
which meant the bullet was still inside. His breathing was labored but steady, not immediately life-threatening if he stayed still.
She tore open a supply pack from the crash cart and packed the wound as tightly as she could with gauze. "Stay here," she told him. "Don't move. When you hear shooting, count to 60 and then crawl to the stairwell. Police are outside. You'll make it." "Who are you?" Sarah didn't answer. She was already moving toward OR3. The operating room door was closed but not locked. Through the small observation window, she could see two men in tactical gear tearing through file cabinets and computer stations. The third was standing guard at the interior door that connected to the scrub room. All three had their backs to the main entrance. Sarah considered her options. She could wait for SWAT, let them handle it by the book. Nobody would fault her for making the tactical decision to hold position and provide intel. Then she saw what the men were doing. They weren't just searching for records, they were destroying everything. Smashing hard drives, shredding paper files, pouring some kind of chemical accelerant over the wreckage. Whatever they were looking for, they planned to erase every trace of it along with anyone who might have seen it. The guard by the scrub room said something into his radio. "Ground floor is compromised. Team 1 is down. We need to finish here and move to extraction." "How long?" one of the others asked. 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Then they'd disappear into whatever exit route they'd planned and take their answers with them. Sarah made her decision. She pulled a flashbang from her belt, another item she'd kept from the old days, stored in her duffel bag alongside everything else she'd sworn she wouldn't need. She counted to 3 in her head, visualizing the room layout and calculating blast radius versus injury potential. Then she kicked the door open and threw the flashbang inside. The explosion was biblical in the confined space. Even through the door, and with her eyes closed, Sarah felt the concussive wave hit her like a physical thing. The sound was a hammer against her eardrums. She counted 2 seconds for the initial shock to pass, then went in hard. The shooters were stumbling, hands over their ears, weapons hanging loose. The guard by the scrub room was closer to the blast point and had dropped to his knees. Sarah put him down with a rifle butt to the base of his skull. The second man was trying to bring his weapon up despite the ringing that must have been turning his brain to soup. Sarah kicked the rifle out of his hands and put 2 rounds into his leg. Not a kill shot, but he wasn't walking out of here under his own power. The third man was faster. He recovered from the flashbang in time to draw his sidearm and fire 3 rounds in her direction. The first went wide. The second caught her in the ballistic vest and knocked the wind out of her lungs. The third would have taken her in the head if she hadn't dropped and rolled behind a surgical table. She came up firing. Her rounds walked up his center mass, stomach, chest, shoulder. He spun with the impacts and crashed into the file cabinets he'd been destroying. Silence flooded back into the room like water filling a vacuum. Sarah checked each man quickly and efficiently. 2 unconscious, 1 dead from the leg wound bleeding out faster than she'd calculated. She felt nothing about that except the cold arithmetic of survival. He'd made his choices. So had she. She grabbed the radio from the dead man's belt and listened. "Team 2, report." Silence. "Team 2, what's your status?" More silence. Then a different voice came on, harder and colder than the first. "Team 2 is neutralized. Pull back to the rally point. We're aborting the operation." "What about the records?" "Burn it all. We're done here." The radio went dead. Sarah stood in the middle of the destroyed operating room, breathing hard, ribs aching where the bullet had caught her vest. The smell of chemical accelerant was overwhelming. They dumped it over everything, computers, files, even the surgical equipment. 1 spark and this entire floor would go up. She keyed her own radio. "Johnson, 2nd floor is clear. 2 shooters down, 1 deceased. You need fire suppression teams up here immediately. They've doused the surgical wing with accelerant." "Copy that. SWAT is moving now. Go 6, hold position for..." "Negative, there are more shooters in the building. I'm tracking." "Go 6, you need to..." She turned the radio off and started moving. The next 30 minutes turned into a running battle through hallways that had been her workplace less than 24 hours ago. Sarah found the 4th shooter in the pharmacy, trying to access controlled substance records. She took him down with a tackle that sent both of them crashing through a storage shelf. Pills scattered across the floor like deadly confetti while they fought in silence, him trying to reach his weapon, her trying to keep him from doing anything except breathing. She won, but it cost her. He got in a lucky elbow that split her eyebrow open and sent blood streaming down the left side of her face.
She returned the favor by slamming his head into the floor until he stopped fighting. The fifth shooter was smarter. He'd barricaded himself in the radiology department with 3 hostages and was demanding helicopter extraction. Sarah could hear him through the door, voice steady and professional, despite the situation falling apart around him.
"You've got 5 minutes to get me a bird on the roof, or I start sending out bodies." She circled the department looking for alternative entry points, found a ventilation shaft that probably wouldn't hold her weight, but didn't have any better options. She climbed into the ductwork and started crawling. The metal groaned under her. Beneath her, she could hear the hostages crying. One of them was begging. The shooter told them to shut up in a voice that suggested he'd carried through on threats before. Sarah reached the vent that opened into the radiology reading room and looked down through the grate. The shooter had his back to her, weapon trained on 3 people, 2 nurses and a patient in a hospital gown who looked about 70 years old. All 3 were on their knees with their hands behind their heads. Sarah pulled the grate free as quietly as possible. The shooter's radio crackled. "Final team member, this is command. Extraction is not happening. You're on your own. Get out however you can." The shooter's shoulders tensed. "You're leaving me?" "The operation is blown. Every agency from here to Quantico is about to come down on that location. Save yourself." Sarah dropped through the vent. She landed behind him and had her weapon against his spine before he could turn around. "Drop it," she said quietly. He froze. For 5 long seconds, nobody moved. The hostages stared. The shooter stood perfectly still with his rifle half raised. Sarah pressed her barrel harder against his back. "I said drop it." "You're not going to shoot me in front of civilians," he said. "You're military. You've got rules." "You're right," Sarah agreed. "I do have rules. They say protect the innocent and eliminate threats. You're the threat. If you shoot me, my finger spasms on this trigger and these 3 people die. If you don't drop your weapon in 3 seconds, I'll shoot you in a way that makes finger spasms impossible." She watched his shoulders shift as he calculated odds, wondered if he could spin fast enough, wondered if she was bluffing. "1," Sarah said. His grip tightened on the rifle. 2. The hostages held their breath. 3. He dropped the weapon. Sarah kicked it away and cable-tied his hands behind his back in one smooth motion. The hostages collapsed in relief. One of the nurses started crying. The elderly patient just sat down hard on the floor and stared at nothing. "Get out of here," Sarah told them. "Stairwell at the end of the hall. Police are waiting." They didn't argue. Sarah secured the shooter to a support beam and left him there with his radio still crackling useless chatter about abort codes and extraction failures. The 6th shooter was the problem. Sarah found him in the executive wing on the 4th floor, and unlike the others, he'd adapted to the situation. He'd seen his entire operation fall apart and had shifted tactics from search and destroy to pure survival. That made him dangerous in a completely different way. She tracked him through 3 floors, following the trail of destruction and abandoned equipment. He was good. Military background for sure, probably special operations based on how he moved. He knew she was following him and he was leading her somewhere specific. She realized we're about 30 seconds too late. The hospital administrator's office had a clear view of the parking lot and the police perimeter beyond. The shooter had set up a position behind Diane Cross's desk with a scoped rifle and a radio scanner. When Sarah stepped through the door, he was tracking SWAT team positions through the scope. "Go 6, he said without turning around. "I was wondering when you'd catch up." Sarah's weapon was already aimed at his head. "Step away from the rifle." "Can't do that. I'm currently providing overwatch for my extraction team." "Your extraction team abandoned you." "The first team did. I've got a backup plan. Always have a backup plan." He finally turned to look at her, and Sarah felt something cold recognize something equally cold. This wasn't some contractor hired for muscle. This was someone who'd operated in the same shadows she had. "You know what's funny?" he said. "I almost took a contract position at this hospital 3 months ago. Medical security consultant. Would have been easy money. Should have taken it. Yeah, well, this paid better." He gestured at the chaos outside. "You've got a choice here. You can shoot me, but that rifle is aimed at the SWAT team leader and my finger's on a dead man's switch. You kill me, I kill him." Sarah didn't lower her weapon. "You're not walking out of here." "Probably not, but neither is he unless we negotiate." "I don't negotiate with terrorists." "I'm not a terrorist. I'm a contractor doing a job that went sideways." Big difference. Not from where I'm standing. He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. You were Army, right? Special Reconnaissance Medical? I heard stories about Ghost 6, medic who pulled 14 wounded out of Kandahar after her convoy got hit. Held a position for 6 hours while everyone bled out around her.
12, Sarah said quietly. 2 didn't make it.
Still, impressive work. He shifted his weight slightly. So you know how this goes. You've been on both sides of the trigger. Sometimes the mission matters more than the morals. Not anymore. That why you're playing nurse in Arizona, trying to forget what you are? I know exactly what I am. Then you know I'm not bluffing about that SWAT leader. Sarah did know. She could see the angle of his rifle, see his finger resting on the trigger guard, see the micro adjustments he was making to keep his aim steady. He wasn't lying. If she shot him, his reflexes would take over and Johnson would die. She lowered her weapon slightly. What do you want? Safe passage to the roof. Helicopter's coming in 3 minutes. You let me board, I let everyone else live. And if I don't? Then we both start killing people we don't want to kill. Sarah's mind ran through the tactical options. She could take the shot and hope his reflexes were slower than she calculated. She could stall and wait for SWAT to breach. She could negotiate and hope he'd leave the rifle behind. None of them were good options. Then her radio crackled. Go 6, this is Johnson. We've got eyes on a hostile in the 4th floor window. Do you have contact? The shooter smiled. Go ahead. Tell them to take me out. But my finger's going to spasm when the bullet hits, and your friend down there is going to die knowing you made the call. Sarah keyed her radio. Contact confirmed. Hold your fire. Repeat, hold your fire. Go 6. That's an order. She looked at the shooter. You've got 2 minutes to get to the roof. After that, every law enforcement agency in the state is going to be hunting you. I'll take my chances. He stood slowly, keeping the rifle trained on the parking lot, backing toward the door that led to the roof access stairs. Sarah tracked him with her weapon, but didn't fire. You're letting me go? He asked. I'm letting you try. What's the difference? You'll find out on the roof. He paused in the doorway, something like respect crossing his face. You're not what I expected. Nobody ever is. He disappeared into the stairwell. Sarah waited 5 seconds, then keyed her radio. Johnson, hostile is moving to the roof. He's expecting helicopter extraction in 90 seconds. Copy. Do we have authorization to engage? Sarah thought about the 12 soldiers she'd saved in Kandahar. Thought about the 2 she'd lost. Thought about every choice she'd made that led from there to here. From combat medic to civilian nurse to whatever the hell she was now. Affirmative, she said. Take him down. The sniper round came from a police position 3 buildings over. Sarah didn't see it, but she heard the impact. A wet final sound that echoed down through the stairwell. Then silence. She walked to the roof access door and looked up. The shooter was crumpled against the rooftop access housing, rifle still in his hands, eyes staring at nothing. The helicopter he'd been expecting was a police bird, not an extraction team. He'd died believing in a rescue that was never coming. Sarah felt nothing about that except tired. She keyed her radio one last time. All targets neutralized. Building is secure. I'm coming out. The walk back down through Mercy Ridge Hospital felt longer than any combat patrol she'd ever run. The building was swarming with police and federal agents now, all of them securing areas and cataloging evidence. They parted around her like water around a stone, nobody quite sure what to do with the woman covered in blood and carrying military-grade weapons through their crime scene. She found Johnson in the ER, coordinating with his team. He looked at her for a long moment, taking in the blood and the torn clothing and the weapon she was still carrying. You look like hell, he said. Feel worse. That was some of the most reckless tactical decision-making I've ever witnessed. Did it work? Everyone's alive except the hostiles. So yeah, it worked. He held out his hand. I need your weapon. Sarah handed it over without argument. Am I under arrest? That's above my pay grade. The feds are going to want to talk to you. So is the hospital administration. So is probably every news outlet between here and Washington. He paused. For what it's worth, you saved a lot of lives today. Just doing what needed doing. That's not what normal nurses do. I'm not a normal nurse. Yeah, Johnson said. I'm starting to figure that out. They were still standing there when Marcus Holt appeared from one of the triage rooms, escorted by 2 FBI agents. He saw Sarah and stopped walking. The agents tried to move him along, but he pulled free of their grip. "You," he said, walking straight toward her. You can't be." Sarah waited. Marcus's face was doing something complicated, cycling through emotions too fast to track. Fear, anger, confusion, something that might have been shame. 3 months, he said. "I spent 3 months trying to prove you were incompetent." "You succeeded," Sarah pointed out. "I got fired yesterday." "Because I thought everyone thought." He stopped. Started again. "What are you?" "I told you already. I'm what you needed me to be." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one you're getting." An FBI agent stepped between them. "Ms. Bennett, we need you to come with us. There are some questions about your involvement in..." "She saved 34 lives," Marcus interrupted. "I counted. 34 people who would be dead right now if she hadn't been here." The agent looked at Marcus like he'd grown a second head. "Sir, I need to tell you that this woman is the only reason I'm still standing. She took down 6 armed men while your people were still setting up a perimeter. So whatever questions you have, you can ask them after you've thanked her for doing your job." Sarah stared at Marcus. He stared back. Something passed between them that didn't have words. Then Linda Cho appeared from the service corridor, followed by a dozen nurses who'd been part of the hostage group. She saw Sarah and stopped cold. "You're the one," Linda said. "The one who got us out." Sarah didn't answer. Linda looked at the blood on Sarah's face, the tactical gear, the way she held herself like violence was just another tool she knew how to use. "I said terrible things about you," Linda whispered. "We all did." "Yeah," Sarah agreed, "you did." "I'm sorry." The words hung in the air between them. Sarah thought about every cruel comment, every dismissive look, every moment of mockery she'd endured for 3 months. Thought about how easy it would be to hold on to that anger, how justified it would feel. Then she thought about the nurse with the abdominal gunshot wound on the 2nd floor, and the elderly patient in radiology, and Marcus with his wrists zip-tied, and all the people who were alive right now because she'd chosen to move forward instead of backward. "Apology accepted," she said. The FBI agent was losing patience. "Ms. Bennett, we really need you to..." "I know," Sarah said. "I'm coming." She started to follow the agent toward the exit when Diane Cross appeared from the administrative wing, flanked by hospital security and looking like she'd aged 10 years in the last hour. She saw Sarah, and her expression went through several rapid transformations. "You," Diane said. "You were fired. You're not supposed to be here." Sarah stopped walking. "No, ma'am," she agreed. "I'm not." "Then what? How did you..." Diane looked around at the chaos, the police, the federal agents, the staff who were all watching this confrontation with expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. "You had no authority to be in this building. That's correct? You could have been killed. You could have gotten other people killed. This is a massive liability issue, and I'm going to have to..." "Ma'am," Marcus cut in quietly, "maybe now isn't the time. Dr. Holt, this woman was terminated for incompetence. She had no business being anywhere near..." "She saved my life," Marcus said. Each word came out hard and precise. "She saved Linda's life. She saved yours, whether you want to admit it or not." Diane's mouth opened and closed. "The incompetence evaluation was wrong," Marcus continued. "I was wrong. And when the federal investigators start asking questions about why a trained combat medic was working here under false pretenses, and why we fired her 24 hours before she saved everyone in this building, you're going to need better answers than liability concerns." He turned to Sarah. "I don't know your whole story. I don't know why you were here or what you were running from. But I know what I saw today, and it wasn't the woman I thought I knew." "You didn't know me at all," Sarah said quietly. "No," Marcus agreed. "I didn't." The FBI agent took Sarah's arm gently but firmly. "We really do need to go." Sarah let herself be led away, leaving behind a hospital full of people who were finally seeing her clearly for the first time. She was halfway to the police perimeter when she heard the helicopter. Not the police bird, something else. Military transport coming in low and fast. It set down in the parking lot with the kind of precision that suggested the pilot had done combat insertions before. The side door opened and the sergeant major stepped out. The FBI agent stopped walking. "What the hell is this?" he asked. The sergeant major walked straight toward them, credentials in hand. "She's coming with me." "The hell she is. We have jurisdiction over—" "Not anymore." The sergeant major handed over a document that made the FBI agent's face go pale. "She's been activated under Federal Protection Protocol 7. That supersedes your jurisdiction. She's ours now." Sarah looked at the sergeant major. "I didn't ask for extraction. Wasn't asking your permission. You went loud in a civilian hospital. Every intelligence agency that's been looking for Ghost 6 just got confirmation you're still operational. You've got about 12 hours before this location becomes the most dangerous place in the Western Hemisphere." "I'm retired." "You neutralized 6 trained operatives in 30 minutes. That's not retired. That's just warming up." He gestured toward the helicopter. "We can argue about your status after we get you somewhere secure." Sarah looked back at the hospital, saw Marcus standing in the doorway, watching, saw Linda and the other nurses clustered together, staring, saw Diane Cross talking urgently to someone on her phone, probably already calculating damage control, saw the building where she'd tried for 3 months to be normal and how spectacularly that had failed. "What about them?" Sarah asked, gesturing at the hospital. "They know my face now. They know what I can do. They'll be debriefed. Standard protocols. Memory's a funny thing. Give it a few weeks and they'll remember today differently. Some brave hospital security guard who saved everyone. Some off-duty cop who happened to be visiting. The story will change until it's safe." "That's not fair to them." "Fair doesn't matter. Safe does." The sergeant major's expression softened slightly. "You did good work today. Nobody's questioning that, but that work just painted a target on everyone you've been in contact with. The people who sent those contractors are going to want answers, and they're going to come looking. You staying here makes everyone less safe, not more." Sarah knew he was right, hated that he was right. "I need 5 minutes," she said. "You've got 2. She walked back toward the hospital, past the police line, past the federal agents securing evidence, past all the machinery of justice that would spend the next 6 months trying to figure out what had really happened here. Marcus was still standing in the doorway. "You're leaving," he said. Not a question. "I was never really here." "That's not true. You were here for 3 months. You saved lives even before today. I checked your patient outcomes. They're flawless." "Doesn't matter now." "It matters to me." Marcus hesitated, looking like he was trying to find words for something he'd never had to say before. "I was wrong about you. Completely, fundamentally wrong. And I spent 3 months making your life hell because I was too arrogant to see what was right in front of me." "You saw what I wanted you to see," Sarah said. "I needed to disappear. You helped with that, even if you didn't know it. That doesn't make it right." "No," Sarah agreed. "It doesn't." Behind her, the sergeant major called out, "Time's up." Sarah started to turn away, then stopped. "The nurse on the 2nd floor, gunshot wound to the abdomen. Make sure he gets to surgery. And the elderly patient from radiology, check him for shock symptoms. He was stable when I left him, but trauma has a delayed onset sometimes." Marcus nodded slowly. "You're still taking care of them, even now." Old habits. "Ghost 6, the sergeant major called again, harder this time. Sarah walked away from Mercy Ridge Hospital for what she knew would be the last time. Walked past Marcus and Linda and Diane and all the people whose lives had intersected with hers for 3 brief months. Walked toward the helicopter where the sergeant major was waiting with the kind of patience that suggested he'd waited for her before in worse circumstances. She climbed aboard. The pilot spooled up the rotors and they lifted off, leaving behind a crime scene that would be analyzed and dissected and argued about in classified briefing rooms for years to come. Sarah looked down at the hospital shrinking below. Saw the police perimeter, saw the news helicopters circling like vultures, saw something else moving on the rooftop of the building across the street. A figure with what looked like a camera, except the lens was too long and the way they were tracking the helicopter suggested this wasn't press coverage. "We've got a tail," she said quietly. The sergeant major followed her gaze and swore. "Spotter. Probably calling in our heading right now. How long until they track us?" "Long enough if we're smart about it." He leaned forward and said something to the pilot that Sarah couldn't hear over the rotors. The helicopter banked hard and dropped into a tactical evasion pattern that made Sarah's stomach lurch. Below them, Clearwater, Arizona disappeared into the desert haze, taking with it any illusion that Sarah Bennett's quiet life had ever been real. The sergeant major handed her a secure phone. "You've got a call coming in. Priority channel." Sarah took the phone and raised it to her ear. The voice on the other end was one she hadn't heard in 3 years, and it sent ice water through her veins. "Hello, Ghost 6. We need to talk about what you did in Kandahar." Sarah's hand tightened around the phone until her knuckles went white. The voice belonged to Colonel James Ashford, the man who'd run special reconnaissance operations in Afghanistan and who'd personally signed her discharge papers 3 years ago. The man who told her she was free to disappear and that the military would forget she'd ever existed. He was lying then, and he was probably lying now. "Kandahar was classified," Sarah said quietly. "That operation doesn't exist on any record." "It didn't," Ashford agreed, "until someone started asking very specific questions about a combat medic who pulled wounded soldiers through 16 hours of enemy territory. Someone who wants to know if that medic is still alive." The helicopter banked hard again. Through the window, Sarah could see 2 black SUVs keeping pace with them on the highway below, not following directly but maintaining parallel course. Professional surveillance. Who's asking? The same people who sent contractors to Mercy Ridge Hospital, the same people who've been hunting down everyone connected to Operation Northwind for the past 6 months. Ashford paused. "They found Captain Morrison last month in Portland, made it look like a car accident. Lieutenant Hayes disappeared from his home in Virginia 2 weeks ago. We found pieces." Sarah felt something cold crystallize in her chest. Morrison had been the convoy commander in Kandahar. Hayes had been the intelligence officer who'd coordinated their extraction route. "How many are left?" she asked. "From your unit? You, me, and Sergeant First Class Rivera. Everyone else is dead or missing." The sergeant major was watching her face. He'd clearly heard enough of the conversation to understand they weren't just running from hospital aftermath anymore. "What do they want?" Sarah asked. "The same thing everyone wants when operations go dark. They want to know what you saw, what you documented, and who you told. Operation Northwind was supposed to be a clean extraction of a high-value intelligence asset. Instead, it turned into a bloodbath that killed 14 civilians and exposed a black site that officially never existed. We saved 12 soldiers. You saved witnesses," Ashford corrected, "witnesses to actions that powerful people would prefer stayed buried. And now those people are tying up loose ends." Sarah closed her eyes and saw Kandahar burning, saw the convoy scattered across 2 miles of desert highway, saw the faces of soldiers she'd dragged through gunfire while mortars turned the sand to glass around them. She'd thought saving them was enough. She'd been wrong. "Why call me now?" she asked. "Why not 3 years ago when this started?" "Because 3 years ago, you were safely disappeared. Nobody knew where Ghost 6 had gone and nobody was looking that hard. Then you went loud at a civilian hospital and lit yourself up on every intelligence radar from here to Langley. Now everyone knows exactly where you are." The helicopter dropped altitude suddenly, flying barely 50 feet above the desert floor. The pilot was good, using terrain masking to break line of sight with anything tracking them from above. "Where are we going?" Sarah asked the sergeant major. He pointed at a map display on his tactical tablet. "Secure facility, 40 miles north. Military airfield with enough firepower to discourage pursuit. We'll regroup there and figure out next moves." "Negative," Ashford's voice cut through the phone. "That facility is compromised. We've had electronic surveillance on it for the past week. The moment you land, you'll have a kill team on your position." The sergeant major grabbed the phone from Sarah's hand. "Colonel, this is Sergeant Major Hayes. Who the hell are you to be giving orders on my operation? I'm the man trying to keep Ghost 6 alive long enough to testify about what happened in Kandahar. And right now your operation is leading her straight into an ambush." Hayes looked at Sarah. She nodded once. He swore and handed the phone back. "Talk," Sarah said to Ashford. "There's a safe house in Nevada, off the grid, no electronic footprint. Rivera is there now. It's the only location we're confident hasn't been compromised. I'm sending coordinates to your pilot." "How do I know this isn't the ambush?" "You don't, but you're out of better options. And in about 90 seconds, those SUVs tracking you are going to realize you're not heading to the military airfield. When that happens, they're going to escalate." As if on cue, the pilot called back. "We've got company. 2 helicopters inbound from the east, civilian markings but flying military patterns." The sergeant major looked out the window and swore. "Not civilian. Those are contract birds. Probably the same outfit that hit the hospital." Sarah made her decision. "Send the coordinates," she told Ashford. "Already done. And Ghost 6? When you get to the safe house, we need to talk about what you're willing to do to stop this." The line went dead. The next 40 minutes turned into a running chase across the Arizona desert. The two pursuing helicopters were faster, but the pilot flying Sarah's bird was better. He used every canyon, every ridgeline, drain, every scrap of cover to stay ahead of targeting solutions. Twice, Sarah heard the distinctive snap of rifle rounds passing close enough to punch holes in the fuselage. "They're not trying to kill us," the pilot called back. "They're trying to force us down." "Why?" Hayes asked. "Because they want her alive," Sarah answered. "Dead medics can't answer questions." The safe house turned out to be an abandoned mining facility built into the side of a mountain in the Nevada backcountry. The helicopter set down on a landing pad that looked like it hadn't been used in decades, kicking up dust and debris that turned the air into a brown fog. Sarah was out before the skids touched ground, weapon up, scanning for threats. The pursuing helicopters were 2 minutes behind them, maybe less. Not enough time to get comfortable, but enough to establish position. The safe house door opened and Sergeant First Class Maria Rivera stepped out. She looked older than Sarah remembered. Harder. 3 years of running had carved lines into her face that hadn't been there in Kandahar. But her eyes were the same, sharp and calculating and missing nothing. "About time you showed up," Rivera said. "Good to see you too." "Save it. We've got incoming hostiles in about 90 seconds to get ready. You still know how to set a defensive perimeter?" "Like riding a bike." They moved together with the efficiency of people who'd worked in combat zones before. Rivera led them through the safe house, 3 rooms carved directly into the mountain, reinforced with steel plating and equipped with enough weapons and supplies to hold off a small army. "Ashford set this up?" Sarah asked. 2 months ago, when Hayes went missing. He knew they'd come for us eventually. The sergeant major was already positioning himself at one of the firing ports that looked out over the approach. "How many are we expecting?" "Contract team is usually 6 operators," Sarah said. "They lost 6 at the hospital, so they'll bring replacements. Figure 8 to 10 hostiles armed with automatic weapons and probably explosives. Against 3 of us." "3 of us who know what we're doing," Rivera corrected. "They're contractors. We're soldiers." The first helicopter landed 50 yards from the safe house. 8 men in tactical gear deployed with textbook precision, spreading out to establish a perimeter. The second bird stayed airborne, providing overwatch. Sarah watched them through a scope. "They're not assaulting yet. They're waiting for something." "Probably negotiations," Rivera said. "They want you alive, remember?" Right on cue, a voice echoed across the distance through a loudspeaker. "Go 6. This is Commander Price with Redstone Security Solutions. We're authorized to bring you in for questioning regarding classified operations in Afghanistan. You're not under arrest, and you have the option to come voluntarily." Sarah didn't respond. "We know about Kandahar," Price continued. "We know about the civilians. We know about the black site. We're prepared to offer immunity in exchange for testimony." "Immunity from who?" Sarah called back. "From the people who want you dead instead of talking." Rivera glanced at Sarah. "That's actually not a terrible offer." "It's a trap," Sarah said. "The moment I walk out there, I'm dead. They'll call it an escape attempt or friendly fire or any one of 100 cover stories." "So what's your plan?" Sarah thought about the 12 soldiers she'd saved in Kandahar, thought about Morrison dead in Portland and Hayes tortured in Virginia, thought about every choice that had led from there to here. We make them work for it. The assault came exactly 14 minutes later. They tried the diplomatic approach first, another round of loudspeaker negotiations that Sarah ignored completely. Then they tried cutting power to the safe house, which didn't work because the facility ran on generators buried deep in the mountain. Finally, they did what Sarah had been expecting from the beginning. They brought out the explosives. The first breach charge went off on the main door with enough force to crack the steel plating. The second charge followed 30 seconds later, widening the gap. Sarah let them work, watching through the scope as they methodically dismantled the primary entrance. "Waiting for an invitation?" Rivera asked. "Waiting for them to commit." The contractors stacked up outside the breached door, 4 men in tight formation, ready to pour through the opening the moment it was wide enough. The other 4 maintained covering positions, weapons trained on the various firing ports around the safe house. Sarah counted down in her head. 3, 2, 1. She fired through this port, not at the assault team but at the support element. Her first round caught one of the covering operators in the shoulder, spinning him around. Her second caught another in the leg, dropping him behind inadequate cover. The assault team scattered immediately, training overriding the plan as they sought cover from unexpected fire. Rivera and Hayes opened up from the other firing ports, creating a crossfire that turned the approach to the safe house into a killing zone. Not killing anyone yet, Sarah was still aiming for limbs and extremities, disabling shots rather than lethal ones. She'd had enough of bodies for one day. But the contractors weren't playing by the same rules. Return fire hammered the safe house like a storm. Rounds punched through the firing ports, ricocheted off steel plating, sent rock fragments flying from the mountain face. Hayes took a graze across his forearm that opened up a 4-inch gash. "We can't hold this position indefinitely," he said, wrapping the wound with medical tape. "Don't need to hold it indefinitely," Sarah answered. "Just long enough." "For what?" "For Ashford to show up." Rivera looked at her sharply. "You think he's coming?" "He called me from a priority line and gave me specific coordinates to a safe house he prepared months ago. Either he's planning to use me as bait to draw out whoever's behind this, or he's planning to extract me before they can. Either way, he's coming." The assault team tried again, this time using smoke grenades to obscure their approach. Sarah switched to thermal imaging and kept firing. She dropped 2 more contractors before they managed to breach the outer room. Then the fight turned close and ugly. The contractors poured through the breach with the kind of aggressive tactics that suggested they'd done this before. Sarah fell back to the second room, using the doorway as a fatal funnel that forced them to come through one at a time. The first man through took Rivera's rifle butt to the face and went down hard. The second one was smarter, throwing a flashbang ahead of him that detonated with stunning force in the confined space. Sarah's ears rang and her vision went white, but muscle memory kept her moving. She dropped low, fired blind where she knew the doorway was, and heard someone scream. When her vision cleared, there were 3 contractors down and the rest had pulled back to regroup. "How many left?" Hayes asked. 4, maybe 5, Sarah said. "Plus the Overwatch bird." "We're running low on ammunition." "I know." The radio on one of the downed contractors crackled to life. "Ground team, this is Overwatch. We're getting new orders. Priority has shifted from capture to elimination. You are weapons-free on all targets." Sarah and Rivera exchanged looks. "That's not good," Rivera said. "That's catastrophic," Sarah corrected. Elimination meant they'd given up on questioning her. Meant someone had decided dead witnesses were better than talking witnesses. Meant the rules had just changed in a way that left no room for half measures. The Overwatch helicopter came in low and fast, door gunner opening up with a machine gun that chewed through the mountain face like it was made of sand. Rounds tore through the safe house, punching holes in steel plating that was supposed to stop small arms fire. Hayes went down with a round through his leg. Sarah dragged him behind cover while Rivera returned fire at the helicopter, forcing it to bank away. But it would come back. They always came back. "We need to move," Sarah said. "Move where?" Rivera demanded. "We're in a box carved into a mountain." "There's always another way out." Sarah had been studying the safe house since she'd arrived, cataloging exits and vulnerabilities the way she'd been trained to do. There was an emergency escape tunnel at the back of the third room, barely wide enough for one person, leading deep into the mountain and supposedly emerging somewhere on the far side. She'd never trusted supposedly, but right now, supposedly was better than definitely dying. "Hayes, can you walk?" "Can I run?" "Even better." They moved through the safe house in a fighting retreat, laying down suppressing fire while falling back toward the escape tunnel. The contractors followed, pushing hard now that they'd been given clearance to kill. Sarah reached the tunnel entrance and pulled it open. Darkness stretched beyond, absolute and suffocating. "Ladies first," Rivera said, firing another burst behind them. Sarah went in, weapon forward, feeling her way through pitch blackness that seemed to swallow sound and light equally. Behind her, she could hear Hayes and Rivera following, their breathing harsh and labored in the confined space. The tunnel went on forever. Sarah's shoulders scraped against rough stone. Her boots slipped on loose gravel. The air was thin and stale, tasting of mineral deposits and something else she couldn't identify. Behind them, gunfire echoed through the tunnel. The contractors had followed them in. Sarah kept moving, faster now, until the tunnel suddenly opened up into a larger chamber. Emergency lighting flickered on automatically, revealing a space about the size of a small house carved from solid rock. and standing in the center of that space was Colonel James Ashford. He was older than Sarah remembered, gray hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from the same stone as the mountain. He wore civilian clothes but carried himself with the posture of someone who'd spent 40 years in uniform. He also had a weapon pointed directly at Sarah's chest. "Hello, Ghost 6, he said quietly. "Thank you for leading them here." Sarah stopped moving. Behind her, Rivera and Hayes stumbled into the chamber and froze when they saw Ashford. "Colonel?" Rivera said slowly. "What are you doing?" "Finishing what should have ended in Kandahar." Ashford's expression was completely calm. "The operation was compromised from the start. Too many witnesses, too many variables, too many people who saw things they shouldn't have seen." "We saved 12 soldiers," Sarah said. "You saved 12 complications. 12 people who could testify about civilian casualties and black site interrogations and all the ugly little secrets we bury to keep the machine running." He gestured with the weapon. "I tried to bury you properly. Gave you new identities, clean discharges, the whole standard package. But people kept asking questions, kept digging, so I had to adapt." "You're the one who sent the contractors," Sarah realized. "I'm the one who hired them to clean up a mess that's been bleeding intelligence for 3 years. Morrison knew too much. Hayes talked to the wrong journalist, and you just couldn't disappear like you were supposed to." Sarah's mind was running calculations. Distance to Ashford, cover options, sight lines, all of it adding up to a tactical picture that didn't have a good solution. "The contractors will be here in about 30 seconds, Ashford continued. "I'm going to tell them you were killed in the tunnel collapse. Rivera and Hayes, too. 3 more casualties in a war nobody wants to admit we're fighting." "And if we don't go quietly?" Rivera asked. "Then I shoot you myself and save them the trouble." The sound of boots echoing through the tunnel was getting louder. Sarah looked at Ashford and saw something she'd seen in too many commanders over too many years. The willingness to sacrifice pieces to protect the king. The cold mathematics of operational security that treated human lives as acceptable losses. She'd followed those orders once. Not anymore. "You're right about one thing," Sarah said. "Kandahar was compromised from the start, but not because of witnesses. Because of you." Ashford's expression flickered. "The convoy route was supposed to be classified," Sarah continued. "Only 3 people knew the extraction path, you, Morrison, and Hayes. But the ambush was set up exactly on our timeline, exactly on our route. Someone told them we were coming. You're reaching. The black site we stumbled on wasn't abandoned. It was operational, and it was running interrogations on the same high-value asset we were supposed to be extracting, which means someone was playing both sides. Careful, Ghost 6. You sold the intelligence to the highest bidder and then tried to clean up the evidence when the operation went sideways. That's why Morrison died. Why Hayes was tortured. Why you're standing here with a gun on the only 3 people who can prove what really happened." The contractors burst into the chamber behind them. Ashford's weapon never wavered. "Kill them all," he said. Sarah moved before the contractors could fire, throwing herself sideways and bringing her weapon up in the same motion. She didn't aim for Ashford. She aimed for the emergency lighting, putting 3 rounds into the fixtures and plunging the chamber into absolute darkness. Gunfire erupted like a thunderstorm in the confined space. Muzzle flashes strobed the darkness, creating freeze-frame images of chaos. Sarah rolled, came up behind a rock formation, returned fire toward where the contractors had been standing. Someone screamed. Someone else shouted orders that got lost in the echoing cacophony. She felt Hayes brush past her in the darkness, moving toward the far side of the chamber. Heard Rivera's weapon bark twice, close and controlled. Heard contractors trying to coordinate in the blackness while their night vision got overwhelmed by muzzle flash. Then new light flooded the chamber. Not emergency lighting, tactical flashlights mounted on rifles, sweeping the space with harsh white beams that turned shadows into weapons. Sarah saw Ashford backing toward an exit she hadn't noticed, weapon still in hand. Saw 2 contractors down, not moving. Saw Rivera pinned behind inadequate cover with blood running down her arm. Saw Hayes limping toward Ashford with murder in his eyes. The sergeant major crashed into the colonel with the force of a freight train, driving him backward into the stone wall hard enough to crack bone. Ashford's weapon went flying. Hayes followed up with a brutal combination that put the older man on the ground. "You sold us out," Hayes said, each word punctuated with another strike. You sold out every soldier who trusted you? Sarah grabbed Hayes's arm before he could kill Ashford. Not yet, she said. He answers questions first. The remaining contractors were regrouping. Sarah counted 3 still standing, all of them armed and looking increasingly uncertain about their employer's instructions now that said employer was bleeding on the ground. The leader, Price, the one who'd tried negotiations earlier, lowered his weapon slightly. This wasn't the contract we signed, he said. You were hired to eliminate witnesses, Sarah answered. That part hasn't changed. We were hired to handle security on a military contract, not murder American soldiers. You drew that line a little late. Price looked at Ashford, then at his remaining team, then back at Sarah. Walk away, he said. Take your people and whatever evidence you've got and walk away. We'll report this as a failed operation and let someone else sort out the details. Why would you do that? Because I've got kids waiting for me at home and this whole thing smells wrong. The money's not worth it. Sarah studied him for 5 long seconds, looking for the trap she was sure existed, found nothing except a tired contractor who just realized he was on the wrong side of a bad situation. Rivera, Sarah called. Can you walk? Can I run? Rivera echoed Hayes's earlier response. Good enough. They moved as a unit, Sarah supporting Rivera, Hayes dragging Ashford, Price and his remaining contractors maintaining a careful distance. The emergency exit led to another tunnel, this one shorter and opening onto the far side of the mountain where Sarah's extraction helicopter still waited. The pilot was leaning against the skid, smoking a cigarette. About time, he said. Thought you might have gotten lost. Just taking the scenic route, Sarah answered. They loaded Ashford into the helicopter, zip-tied and barely conscious. Rivera's arm wound was worse than she'd admitted, through and through on the bicep, bleeding steadily. Hayes's leg had stopped bleeding, but he was limping badly. Sarah was running on adrenaline and spite. The helicopter lifted off just as the sun was starting to set over the Nevada desert, painting the sky in shades of red that reminded Sarah of other sunsets in other deserts. She was trying not to think about how many of those sunsets had ended in blood. Where to? The pilot asked. Sarah pulled out the secure phone and dialed the only number she had left. It rang 4 times before someone picked up. This is Deputy Director Ellen Crawford, Defense Intelligence Agency. Identify yourself. This is Sarah Bennett, formerly Ghost 6, Special Reconnaissance Medical Division. I'm currently in possession of Colonel James Ashford and evidence linking him to the sale of classified intelligence and the murder of multiple American soldiers. I need immediate extraction to a secure DIA facility, and I need it before someone decides it's easier to shoot down this helicopter than let us land. Silence stretched across the line. Then Crawford's voice came back, hard and precise. Transmit your coordinates. You'll have an escort in 10 minutes. And Bennett? Don't trust anyone until you're in my custody. Ashford had friends in high places. Noted. The escort turned out to be 4 Apache gunships that formed up around the helicopter like protective angels. They flew in formation across 3 states, landing finally at a classified facility somewhere in the desert mountains, where the DIA maintained interrogation rooms deep enough that no amount of screaming could reach the surface. Sarah had been in rooms like that before, never thought she'd be on this side of them. Crawford met them on the landing pad, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen every kind of betrayal the intelligence community could produce. Ms. Bennett, she said, you've had quite a day. That's one way to put it. Colonel Ashford has been a person of interest for the past 6 months. We suspected he was involved in the Kandahar cleanup, but couldn't prove it. Looks like you've done our job for us. I want immunity, Sarah said. For me, Rivera, and Hayes, complete and total immunity for anything related to Operation Northwind. That's a big ask. It's a small price for testimony that'll bring down one of your own colonels and expose a 3-year cover-up of war crimes. Crawford studied her for a long moment. Deal, she said, but you give us everything. Every detail, every name, every piece of evidence, and you do it now before someone higher up the chain decides you're too much of a liability. They spent the next 6 hours in a room without windows while Sarah told the story of Kandahar from beginning to end. Told them about the convoy ambush and the black site and the 12 soldiers she'd dragged through enemy fire. Told them about Morrison and Hayes and all the people who died to keep secrets that weren't worth keeping. Told them everything except the part where she'd tried to disappear into civilian life and how spectacularly that had failed. By the time she finished, the sun was coming up again outside. Crawford sat across the table with 3 legal pads full of notes and an expression that suggested she was already calculating how many careers this was going to destroy. "This goes all the way to Pentagon leadership," she said quietly. "Maybe higher." "I know." "You understand what you're walking into? The kind of attention this will bring?" Sarah thought about Marcus Holt and Linda Cho and all the people at Mercy Ridge Hospital who'd spent 3 months thinking she was weak. Thought about how wrong they'd been and how right they'd almost been. "I spent 3 years trying to hide," she said. "Didn't work out. Maybe it's time to stop hiding." "That's a brave choice. It's the only one left." Crawford stood and extended her hand. "Welcome back to the war, Ghost 6. Sarah shook it, feeling the weight of decision settling onto her shoulders like armor she'd thought she'd taken off forever. 48 hours later, Colonel James Ashford was formally charged with treason, conspiracy to commit murder, and a list of other crimes that would keep legal teams busy for the next 5 years. The story leaked to the press within a week, sanitized and redacted, but enough truth getting out that people started asking the right questions. Sarah gave testimony in closed congressional hearings that lasted 3 days. Gave depositions to military investigators that filled 200 pages of documentation. Gave interviews to intelligence oversight committees that wanted to know how someone like Ashford could have operated undetected for so long. The answer was always the same. People saw what they wanted to see, just like they had at Mercy Ridge. Sarah was standing in a DIA safe house in Washington, D.C., watching the news coverage of Ashford's arraignment when her secure phone rang. "Bennett. Ms. Bennett, this is Diane Cross, from Mercy Ridge Hospital." Sarah almost hung up. Her finger was literally on the button when curiosity overrode common sense. "I'm listening." "I'm calling to offer you your job back. Full reinstatement, complete expungement of your personnel file, and a formal apology from hospital administration. You fired me for incompetence." "I was wrong. Dr. Holt was wrong. The entire evaluation process was compromised and we—" "Save it," Sarah interrupted. "I'm not coming back." "May I ask why?" Sarah looked at her reflection in the window glass, saw someone who looked like her but wasn't quite her anymore. Someone who'd tried to be normal and failed. Someone who'd saved lives at a hospital and then saved more lives by going to war in that same building. Someone who finally understood she couldn't be both things at once. "Because I'm not a nurse anymore," she said. She hung up before Diane could respond. 3 weeks later, Sarah sat across from Deputy Director Crawford in an office overlooking the Potomac River. "The military wants you back," Crawford said without preamble. "Full reinstatement with rank advancement and assignment to Special Operations Medical Training Command." "I'm retired." "That's what you said last time. Then you neutralized 6 contractors and exposed a treasonous colonel. Retirement doesn't look good on you." Sarah didn't answer. "Or," Crawford continued, "you could work for us. DIA, Medical Intelligence Division. We handle situations where military and intelligence operations overlap. Situations that require someone who can operate in both worlds. I've spent 3 years trying to get out of those worlds. And you've spent the last month proving you can't." Crawford slid a folder across the desk. "There are 12 active investigations into military medical personnel who've gone missing or died under suspicious circumstances in the past year. All of them connected to classified operations. All of them potential Ashfords in the making." Sarah opened the folder, saw faces she recognized, saw names from units she'd worked with, saw the same pattern she'd been living for 3 years, soldiers trying to disappear and someone systematically hunting them down. "You want me to find whoever's doing this," she said. "I want you to stop it before we lose anyone else." Sarah closed the folder and pushed it back across the desk. "I need 48 hours to think about it." "You've got 24... Sarah walked out of the DIA building into Washington sunshine that felt nothing like Arizona heat. She'd left her car in a parking garage 3 blocks away, parked in a spot that gave her clear sight lines to the exit, and kept her vehicle between 2 concrete support pillars. Old habits. She was halfway to the car when she saw the envelope tucked under the wiper blade. No postage, no address. Just her name written in handwriting she recognized instantly. Sarah looked around the parking garage, scanning for threats, finding nothing except shadows and concrete and the distant sound of traffic. She opened the envelope. Inside was a single photograph, grainy, and clearly taken from security footage. It showed Sarah walking into Mercy Ridge Hospital on her first day of work 3 months ago. Someone had drawn a red circle around her face. On the back, written in the same handwriting, "We found 12 of them. How many more are hiding? No signature. No return address." Just a threat dressed up as a question. Sarah stood in the parking garage holding evidence that someone out there was doing exactly what Crawford had described, hunting down soldiers who'd tried to disappear. Someone who'd been tracking her for months, maybe years. Someone who knew she was Ghost 6 before she'd ever stepped foot in Arizona. Her phone buzzed. "Unknown number," she answered. "You have something that belongs to us," a voice said. Male, filtered through a modulator that stripped away identifying features. "Colonel Ashford was an asset. You've disrupted a very delicate operation. He was a traitor. He was a businessman. And now you've become a very expensive problem." "I'm used to being a problem." "We know. We've been watching you for quite some time, Ms. Bennett. Or should I call you Ghost 6? Or maybe we should use your real name, the one you had before the military gave you a new identity." Sarah's blood went cold. Her real name was buried under so many layers of classified documentation that even she sometimes forgot what it was. "Who are you?" she asked. "We're the people who decide which secrets stay buried and which witnesses stay alive. And right now, you're on the wrong side of both those equations." The line went dead. Sarah looked at the photograph again, then at the parking garage around her, then at the DIA building in the distance. Crawford had offered her a job hunting down whoever was killing medical personnel. Turned out they were already hunting her, and they knew things about her past that should have been impossible to know. Sarah got in her car and drove. Not sure where she was going, but absolutely certain she couldn't stay still. Somewhere behind her, in the traffic and the crowds and the machinery of Washington, D.C., someone was watching. Someone who knew her real name. Someone who'd been patient enough to wait 3 years for her to surface. And now that she had, they were coming to collect. Sarah drove for 3 hours before she was certain nobody was following her. She used every counter-surveillance technique she'd been trained on. Random turns, highway exits that led nowhere, parking garages where she could watch traffic patterns. The photograph sat on the passenger seat like a live grenade. Her real name. Someone knew her real name. She pulled into a truck stop outside Richmond and sat in the parking lot, watching 18-wheelers come and go while her mind ran through possibilities. The military had given her a new identity when she'd enlisted at 19, standard procedure for certain special operations personnel. Her original birth certificate had been sealed, her childhood records expunged, even her fingerprints had been altered through a process she'd been told was classified. Someone had peeled back all those layers. The question was why now? Her phone rang. "Crawford." "Where are you?" the deputy director asked. "Driving?" "That's not an answer. You left the building 3 hours ago and dropped off every tracking system we have. That makes me nervous." "Someone left a message on my car, a photograph and a phone call. They know things they shouldn't know." "What kind of things?" Sarah hesitated. Saying it out loud made it real in a way she wasn't ready to face. "My original identity, before the military." Crawford was silent for 5 seconds. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted into a different register, the one she probably used in threat briefings. "That information is buried under executive classification. Only 3 people in the entire intelligence community should have access." "Then one of those 3 people is compromised. Or you are." Sarah felt ice water in her veins. "Explain. The envelope on your car. Did you touch it with bare hands?" "Yes." "Then whoever left it has your current fingerprints, which means they can cross-reference them against the altered prints in your military file and prove they don't match, which means they can prove you're not who you claim to be." Sarah closed her eyes. She'd walked straight into a trap without seeing it coming. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. "Come back to DC right now. We'll put you in protective custody until—" "Negative. Protective custody makes me a sitting target." "You're a target either way. At least this way I can move." She hung up before Crawford could argue and pulled out of the truck stop, heading south on instinct and training. If someone was coming for her, the worst thing she could do was make herself predictable. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. The hospital in Arizona was very public, very loud. "We prefer our operations quieter. You have 72 hours to disappear completely, or we'll make sure everyone you've ever helped becomes a liability. Starting with Dr. Marcus Holt. Sarah read it twice, feeling rage build behind her ribs like pressure in a sealed container. They were threatening civilians now. She made 3 calls in rapid succession. The first was to Rivera, still recovering in a DIA medical facility.
Someone just threatened the hospital staff from Mercy Ridge. I need you to run deep background on everyone who worked there. Doctors, nurses, administrators. Look for financial problems, legal issues, anything that makes them vulnerable to coercion. You think they'll go after them? I think they'll use them as leverage. Find the weak points before someone else does. The second call was to Hayes, who'd been released from medical care but was still limping. I need you to reach out to every soldier from Kandahar who's still alive, the ones we saved. Tell them to go dark for 72 hours. No contact with family, no social media, no predictable patterns, just disappear. They're going to want to know why. Tell them Go 6 said the war isn't over. The third call was to Marcus Holt's personal number, which she'd pulled from hospital records months ago and never deleted. He answered on the second ring. Dr. Holt. It's Sarah Bennett. Silence. Then his voice came back, careful and controlled. I was told you were working with federal investigators. I am. But right now I'm calling because you're in danger. From what? From people who want to use you to get to me. They're going to approach you in the next few days, probably claiming to be federal agents or military investigators. They'll ask questions about me, about the hospital attack, about anything I might have said during my time at Mercy Ridge. What should I tell them? Nothing. Don't confirm I work there. Don't confirm you know me. Don't engage at all. Just refer them to hospital legal counsel and end the conversation. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Sarah could hear background noise that suggested he was still at the hospital. You saved my life, he said finally. Whatever you need, you have it. I need you to stay safe. That's not something you can guarantee. No, Sarah agreed, but I can make it expensive for anyone who tries to hurt you. She hung up and kept driving. Somewhere in the machinery of Washington, D.C., wheels were turning. Crawford would be briefing superiors. Ashford would be in an interrogation room, probably negotiating immunity in exchange for names. The contractors who'd survived would be scattered across the country, trying to decide whether to run or cooperate. And somewhere in that same machinery, someone was pulling strings that reached back to before Sarah had ever enlisted. Someone who knew her real name. She needed to find out who before the 72-hour clock ran out. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Sarah had checked into a motel outside Charlotte using cash and a fake ID when her phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Rivera. Found something. Hospital administrator Diane Cross filed bankruptcy 3 years ago. Dismissed 6 months later after sudden cash infusion from an unnamed source. Amount, $847,000. Sarah stared at the message. $800,000 was specific, not round numbers, not a suspicious million. Specific enough to be real money changing hands for real reasons. She called Rivera back. Where did the money come from? That's the interesting part. It was routed through 4 different shell corporations before landing in Cross's account. I traced them back as far as I could and hit a wall at a defense contractor called Redstone Security Solutions. The same company Commander Price worked for. The same company that had sent operators to the hospital. Sarah felt pieces clicking into place. Diane Cross was compromised before I ever started working at Mercy Ridge. Looks that way. Someone paid off her debts in exchange for cooperation, which means they knew I was there. They knew from day one. Sarah's mind was racing now. She'd thought she was being careful when she'd applied to Mercy Ridge, thought she'd buried her tracks. But if someone inside the hospital had been feeding information to Redstone, then every move she'd made had been watched. There's more, Rivera continued. I pulled financial records on Dr. Marcus Holt. He's clean, but he transferred to Mercy Ridge from a hospital in California 2 years ago after what was officially listed as a personnel conflict. What was it really? Medical malpractice lawsuit. 3 patients died during emergency surgeries he supervised. The families sued for wrongful death. Case was settled out of court for an undisclosed amount and sealed by court order. Let me guess. Redstone's fingerprints on the settlement? Can't prove it yet, but the timing lines up. Sarah leaned back against the motel room wall and let it sink in.
Marcus hadn't come to Mercy Ridge by choice. He'd been placed there, probably as another compromised asset. The malpractice suit gave someone leverage. Cooperate, or we release the sealed records and destroy your career. Which meant Marcus's vendetta against Sarah might not have been personal at all. It might have been assignment. She needed to talk to him again. But first, she needed to understand the full scope of what she was facing. Sarah spent the next 6 hours pulling apart the network that had been built around her. She used databases Crawford had given her access to, combined them with information Rivera was feeding her, and slowly assembled a picture that made her stomach turn. Redstone Security Solutions wasn't just a contractor company. It was a front for an intelligence operation that had been running for at least 5 years, placing compromised personnel in hospitals and medical facilities across 12 states. The goal seemed to be creating a network of assets who could manipulate medical records, facilitate disappearances, and provide cover for operations that needed to stay off official books. Sarah had stumbled into their operation when she'd applied to Mercy Ridge, and they'd used her presence to test their network. The hospital attack hadn't been about the wounded soldier at all. That had been cover. The real objective had been to see if their compromised personnel, Diane Cross, Marcus Holt, probably others, would follow orders when things got violent. Sarah had disrupted that test by going loud. Now they wanted her gone before she could expose the entire operation. Her phone rang at 2 a.m. Marcus Holt. "They came to my house," he said without preamble. His voice was shaking. "2 men, federal credentials, started asking about you." "What did you tell them?" "Nothing, like you said, but they weren't really asking questions. They were making threats." Sarah sat up. "What kind of threats?" "They had the sealed records from California, the malpractice case. They said if I didn't cooperate with their investigation into you, the records would be leaked to every medical board in the country." "Did you cooperate?" "No." Marcus let out a bitter laugh. "I told them to go to hell. Then I called my lawyer and filed a police report. The police say the credentials were fake." Sarah felt something shift. Marcus had been compromised, but he'd made a choice. When pressed, he'd chosen the harder path. "They're going to come back," she said. "I know, but I'm not running. I've spent 2 years running from what happened in California. I'm done." "Marcus, you saved my life at the hospital. You saved Linda's life. You saved people I'd spent 3 months treating like garbage because I was being blackmailed into running you off. The least I can do is stand up straight when someone tries to use me against you." Sarah didn't know what to say to that. "Where are you now?" she asked. "Hospital. I figured public place with security cameras was safer than home." "Stay there. I'm sending federal protection." "I don't want protection. I want to help." "You are helping by staying alive and not giving them leverage." She called Crawford next. "I need a protective detail on Dr. Marcus Holt at Mercy Ridge Hospital, Arizona. Armed, visible, and immediate." "That's going to attract attention." "That's the point. I want whoever's running this operation to know they can't touch civilian witnesses without consequences." "You're using him as bait." "I'm using him as a line in the sand." Crawford was silent for a moment. "This is personal for you now." "It was always personal. I just didn't know it yet." The protective detail arrived at Mercy Ridge within 3 hours. 4 federal marshals who took up positions around Marcus with the kind of visible presence that made a statement. Sarah watched through security cameras Rivera had hacked into, looking for anyone who showed unusual interest. She found them at dawn. 2 men in business suits watching the hospital from a car in the parking lot. They didn't approach, didn't make contact, just watched and took photographs. Sarah ran their license plate through law enforcement databases and got a hit that made her jaw clench. The car was registered to a subsidiary company owned by Thomas Whitmore, a former CIA deputy director who'd retired 5 years ago and now ran a private intelligence consultancy. The same Thomas Whitmore who'd been investigated, but never charged, for selling classified information to foreign governments. The same Thomas Whitmore who'd served in Afghanistan during the same time frame as Operation Northwind. Sarah called Crawford. "I know who's running this. Thomas Whitmore." "That's impossible. Whitmore was cleared of all charges." "Cleared because someone buried the evidence. I'm betting that someone was Ashford." "You have proof?" "Not yet, but I know how to get it." Sarah drove straight through the night back to Washington, D.C., arriving at the DIA building as the sun was coming up. She walked past security with credentials Crawford had arranged, took the elevator to the detention level, and requested access to Colonel James Ashford.
The guards looked uncomfortable.
"Colonel Ashford isn't taking visitors," one of them said. "He'll take me." "Ma'am." Sarah held up her phone, showing them a text authorization from Crawford. The guards exchanged looks, then opened the door. Ashford was sitting in an interrogation room that was trying very hard to look like a conference room and failing. He looked older than he had in Nevada, grayer, smaller, like betrayal had physically diminished him. He looked up when Sarah walked in.
"Come to gloat?" he asked. "Come to make a deal. I've already got a deal, full immunity in exchange for testimony. That deal's about to evaporate. Someone's actively hunting down everyone connected to Kandahar, and when they're done, your testimony won't matter because all the witnesses will be dead." Ashford's expression flickered. Sarah sat down across from him. "Thomas Whitmore," she said. "You worked with him in Afghanistan." "Whitmore was CIA, different chain of command, but you coordinated on operations, including Northwind." Ashford didn't answer. "He's the one who bought the intelligence from you," Sarah continued. "You sold him the convoy route, the extraction timeline, everything. He passed it to the insurgents who ambushed us. Then when the operation went sideways and witnesses survived, he started cleaning up. You can't prove that." "I can if you testify." "I've already agreed to testify against myself. Why would I add someone else to that list?" "Because Whitmore's the one who sent those fake federal agents to threaten Dr. Holt. He's the one who's been systematically eliminating everyone from Kandahar. And he's the one who gave the order to kill you if you became a liability." Sarah pulled out her phone and played a recorded conversation. One of the contractors Price had turned over as part of his cooperation deal. The voice was filtered, but the words were clear. "If Ashford talks, eliminate him. Make it look like suicide. Remorse over betraying his country." Ashford's face went pale. "Whitmore said that?" 6 weeks ago. You've been on borrowed time ever since you got arrested." "That son of a bitch." "So here's the deal," Sarah said. "You give me everything you have on Whitmore. Communications, financial records, operational details. I use it to bring him down. And you get to stay alive in witness protection instead of dying in a cell that's made to look like you hung yourself." Ashford stared at her for a long time. "If I do this, I'm burning every bridge I have left. You burned those bridges when you sold out your soldiers. This is just acknowledging reality." He laughed, sharp and bitter. "You know what's funny? I actually respected you, Ghost 6, the medic who wouldn't quit. I read your file when I was planning Northwind and thought you'd be perfect for the operation. That why you tried to have me killed? That's why I tried to bury you properly. Clean discharge, new identity, fresh start. I thought I was doing you a favor." He shook his head. "Should have known you'd dig your way back out. Kandahar taught me not to stay buried." Ashford reached for a pen and paper the guards had left on the table. "Whitmore keeps everything on encrypted servers, but he's old school. He also keeps physical backups in a safe at his estate in Virginia. Combination is his daughter's birthday, 0723. "How do you know that?" "Because I've been to his estate, multiple times. He likes showing off his insurance policy." Sarah took the paper. "Anything else?" "Yeah, Whitmore's not working alone. He's got at least 2 sitting senators on his payroll and probably a dozen other military officers in various stages of compromise. You go after him. You go after an entire network." "Good. That doesn't scare you?" "I spent 3 months getting humiliated by a hospital administrator who was bought and paid for. I spent 3 years running from shadows. I'm done being scared." She walked out of the interrogation room and straight into Crawford's office. "I need a warrant for Thomas Whitmore's estate in Virginia." Crawford looked up from her computer. "Based on what evidence?" "Based on Ashford's testimony that Whitmore has physical evidence of espionage, murder, and conspiracy in a safe at that location. A judge is going to want more than the word of a confessed traitor." "Then we don't wait for a judge." Crawford's expression hardened. "You're talking about an illegal search." "I'm talking about stopping people from dying. We can sort out legality after we've secured the evidence." "That's not how this works." "It is if you want Whitmore before he realizes Ashford talked and destroys everything." They stared at each other across the desk. "If this goes wrong," Crawford said quietly, "we both lose our careers." "I don't have a career. I have a target on my back and a 72-hour deadline. Careers are the least of my problems." Crawford made her decision. "You've got 12 hours.
After that, if you don't have evidence, I disavow everything and you are on your own. Understood. Sarah assembled a team in 4 hours, Rivera still favoring her wounded arm but refusing to sit out. Hayes limping but armed. 2 DIA tactical operators Crawford trusted absolutely. And Sarah herself, carrying the weight of 3 years' worth of running that was about to end. Whitmore's estate was in horse country outside Charlottesville. 60 acres of manicured grounds surrounded by stone walls and security that was sophisticated enough to keep out casual trespassers, but not tactical operators who knew what they were doing. They went in at dusk. Sarah led them through the perimeter using night vision and hand signals, bypassing cameras and motion sensors with the efficiency of people who'd done this in worse places. The main house was a colonial-style mansion that probably cost more than most people made in a lifetime. Whitmore was sitting in his study when they breached. He looked up from his desk without surprise, which told Sarah he'd been expecting this. "Go 6, he said calmly. "You're more persistent than I gave you credit for." "Where's the safe?" "What safe?" Hayes put a weapon against Whitmore's head. "The one with your daughter's birthday as the combination." Whitmore smiled. "Ashford told you that?" "He always did crack under pressure." "Last chance," Sarah said. "Behind the bookshelf. But you're wasting your time. Everything in there is encrypted or coded. You'll never prove anything." Sarah found the safe exactly where Ashford said it would be, opened it with the combination he'd provided. Inside were 3 hard drives, 2 burner phones, and a ledger that looked like it had been maintained for decades. She handed everything to Rivera, who started photographing pages while the tactical operators secured the perimeter. Whitmore watched with the expression of someone who'd already calculated his odds and found them acceptable. "You think this ends with me?" he asked. "I'm just middle management. The people I work for have resources you can't imagine." "Then they can use those resources to hire you a lawyer," Sarah said. "This won't go to trial. Too many classified operations involved. They'll bury everything in national security exemptions, and I'll walk free in 6 months. "Maybe. But you'll walk free knowing everyone you've ever worked with now knows you kept insurance files. That's a death sentence in your world." Whitmore's smile faltered. Sarah leaned closer. "You wanted me disappeared because I'm a witness. Now you're the witness everyone's going to be trying to disappear." She left him there for Crawford's team to collect and walked out of the mansion into Virginia twilight. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. For a moment she considered not answering. Then habit overruled caution. "Bennett." "Congratulations," the filtered voice from before said. "You've successfully dismantled one of our operational networks. That's impressive work." "Whitmore's going down. So is everyone who worked with him." "Whitmore was a useful idiot who overextended himself. We would have cut him loose eventually anyway. You just accelerated the timeline." Sarah felt ice in her stomach. "Who are you? We're the people who gave you your first identity. The ones who erased your childhood and built you into something useful. Did you really think the military did that out of kindness?" "You're lying. Your birth name was Jennifer Cates. You grew up in foster care in Ohio after your parents died in a car accident when you were 7. Except they didn't die in an accident. They were eliminated because your father was an investigative journalist who got too close to exposing a network of corruption in military procurement. We made it look like an accident, placed you in foster care, and waited." Sarah couldn't breathe. "Waited for what?" "For you to be old enough to enlist. For you to be angry enough and skilled enough to be useful. We've been guiding your path for 20 years, Ghost 6. Every posting, every operation, every choice you thought you made freely. You've been ours since you were 7 years old." The line went dead. Sarah stood in the driveway of Whitmore's estate, phone in her hand, while the world collapsed into a single point of terrible clarity. Everything she'd built. Everything she'd survived. Everything she'd thought was her own choice. All of it had been choreographed by people she'd never seen, for reasons she didn't understand. And somewhere out there, they were still watching, still waiting, still pulling strings. Sarah stood in the driveway for 2 minutes, phone dead in her hand, while her entire existence reorganized itself around information she couldn't verify, but somehow knew was true. Jennifer Cates. The name meant nothing and everything. She tried to remember being 7 years old, tried to pull up memories of parents who died in a car accident that wasn't an accident. Found only fragments, a woman's laugh, a man reading newspapers at a kitchen table, the smell of something burning. Everything else was military. Training and deployment and the person they'd built her into. Rivera appeared beside her. "We've got the files. Whitmore's in federal custody. This is over." "No," Sarah said quietly. "It's not." She walked back to the vehicle where Hayes was loading equipment, her mind already 3 steps ahead. Someone had orchestrated her entire life. Someone had enough reach to manipulate military records, forge identities, and run operations that spanned 2 decades. Someone who was still out there, still watching, still believing they owned her. She needed to find them before the 72-hour deadline expired, and they started killing people she cared about. The answer came from the ledger Rivera had photographed. They were back at the DIA facility, spreading documents across 3 tables, while Crawford coordinated with Justice Department prosecutors who were already building cases against Whitmore and his network. Sarah ignored the legal machinery and focused on the ledger. It was organized by operation name and date, going back 15 years. Most of the entries were coded, but some were clear enough to parse. Operation Northwind was listed with payments totaling $4 million spread across 7 accounts. Morrison's death was listed as asset retirement with a $50,000 payout. Hayes' disappearance showed up as enhanced interrogation, inconclusive. Sarah found her own entry near the back. Project Nightingale, long-term asset development. Subject: J.K. recruited, age 19, military enlistment facilitated. Specialized medical training completed. Combat deployment to Afghanistan successful. Cover identity: Sarah Bennett, established post-discharge. Civilian integration monitoring ongoing. Total investment $2.3 million. Below that, a handwritten note in Whitmore's scratchy penmanship. Check with architect on final activation timeline. Architect. Sarah photographed the page and sent it to Crawford with a single-word message. "Who?" Crawford's response came back in 30 seconds. "Conference room. Now." The deputy director was standing at a digital display showing a network map when Sarah walked in. Lines connected names and organizations in a web so complex it looked like abstract art. "The architect," Crawford said without preamble, "is what we've been calling an entity that's appeared in intelligence intercepts for the past decade. We don't know if it's one person or a group. We don't know their ultimate objectives. What we do know is that they've been involved in everything from weapons procurement fraud to political assassinations to the kind of long-term human asset development that your file suggests." "They built me," Sarah said. "It appears so." "Why?" "We don't know, but Whitmore's ledger suggests Project Nightingale was designed to create a combat medic with specific skills who could be activated for operations that required medical expertise and tactical capability. You weren't supposed to disappear after Kandahar. You were supposed to stay operational." Sarah looked at the network map, tracing connections that led to Pentagon officials, defense contractors, intelligence agencies. "How do we find them?" "We don't. The architect doesn't leave physical evidence. No communications we can intercept, no financial trails we can follow. They work through cutouts and intermediaries like Whitmore who don't know the full picture." "Then we make them come to us." Crawford's expression was skeptical. "How?" "They threatened civilians to get my attention. They wanted me to know they could reach anyone I cared about. That means they're monitoring my communications, my movements, probably my thoughts if they could figure out how." Sarah pulled out her phone. "So we give them what they want." "Which is?" "Me. On their terms. Except we control the terms without them knowing it." It took 6 hours to set the trap. Sarah made a very public announcement through channels she knew were compromised. She was done running, done fighting. She wanted to negotiate terms for her cooperation with the architect in exchange for protection for everyone connected to Kandahar. The message was calculated to appeal to exactly the kind of arrogance that had led the architect to believe they could choreograph someone's entire life. She specified a meeting location, a decommissioned military facility outside Baltimore that had been used for classified debriefings during the Cold War. Public enough to seem legitimate, isolated enough to seem controllable. The response came within an hour. A text message from an unknown number. "Midnight. Come alone. Bring the Whitmore files." Sarah showed it to Crawford. "It's a trap," the deputy director said. "Obviously." "You're going anyway." "Obviously. I can't authorize federal resources for an unsanctioned operation based on a text message from an unknown entity." Sarah smiled thinly. Good thing I'm not asking for authorization. She went alone, but not unarmed. Rivera and Hayes were positioned a quarter-mile out with high-powered rifles and communications gear. Crawford had a tactical team on standby 2 miles away, far enough not to spook surveillance, but close enough to respond if everything went wrong. The facility was exactly as Sarah remembered from her training days. A concrete box surrounded by chain-link fence, windows dark, the whole structure radiating abandonment. She walked through the main entrance at 11:58, weapon holstered but accessible. The Whitmore files in a backpack over her shoulder. The interior smelled like mold and old fear. She found them waiting in what used to be the main briefing room. 3 people sitting at a table like this was a corporate board meeting instead of the culmination of 20 years of manipulation. 2 men, 1 woman. All of them older, probably in their 60s. All of them dressed in civilian clothes that probably cost more than Sarah made in a year. None of them looked like monsters. That was the thing about evil. It rarely announced itself. The woman spoke first. Go 6. Or should we call you Jennifer? You can call me Sarah, that's who I am now. Identity is fluid, one of the men said. He had the kind of accent that suggested expensive education and old money. We've given you several over the years. You've worn them all well. Sarah set the backpack on the table. You wanted the Whitmore files. Here they are. The woman opened the bag, verified the contents, and nodded to her companions. Good. Now we can discuss your future. I don't have a future with you. Of course you do. You've always had a future with us. We invested substantially in your development, your training, your expertise, your unique combination of medical and tactical skills. All of it was by design. You're our finest achievement. Sarah felt rage building behind her ribs, but kept her voice level. You killed my parents. We eliminated liabilities, the second man corrected. Your father was investigating corruption that would have exposed operations critical to national security. We made a tactical decision. He was a journalist doing his job. He was collateral damage. As are many people in this business, you of all people should understand that. Sarah took a slow breath. What do you want from me? Continued service. You've proven exceptionally capable in crisis situations. The hospital in Arizona, the operation against Whitmore, your survival instincts, all of it confirms our initial assessment. We have work that requires someone with your specific skill set. And if I refuse? The woman smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. Then we activate contingencies. Dr. Marcus Holt dies in a medical malpractice incident that destroys his career and his life. Nurse Linda Cho has a tragic accident. The 12 soldiers you saved in Kandahar start disappearing one by one. We're very good at making problems go away, Sarah. You know this because we made you good at it too. Sarah's hand moved toward her weapon. All 3 of them produced firearms simultaneously with the speed of people who'd been expecting this. Don't, the woman said. We're faster and better positioned. You die here, and our contingencies activate anyway. Everyone you've tried to protect dies, all for nothing. You're wrong about one thing, Sarah said. What's that? You're not faster. The gunfire came from outside. Rivera and Hayes executing precision shots through windows Sarah had deliberately left exposed in the facility's security assessment. The first round took the woman in the shoulder, spinning her around. The second caught the man with the accent in the leg. The third man got his shot off, catching Sarah in the same ballistic vest she'd been wearing since Nevada. The impact knocked her backward, but she was already moving, weapon up, putting 2 rounds into his chest before he could fire again. The woman was reaching for her dropped weapon when federal agents stormed through every entrance simultaneously. Crawford had positioned them closer than 2 miles, much closer. Turned out the deputy director was better at unsanctioned operations than she'd let on. The 3 architects of Sarah's entire existence were zip-tied and secured within 90 seconds. Medical teams arrived to treat gunshot wounds that were designed to incapacitate rather than kill. Sarah stood in the middle of the briefing room, breathing hard, ribs aching from the bullet impact, while everything she'd thought she understood about her life rearranged itself one final time. Crawford walked through the chaos like she owned it. We've got them, she said. All 3. Plus the files from Whitmore, plus Ashford's testimony, plus recordings of everything they said in this room. It's enough to prosecute. Who are they? Sarah asked. We're still identifying them. but preliminary checks suggest former intelligence officials who've been operating outside oversight for at least 15 years. We're going to spend the next decade unraveling everything they've built. Sarah looked at the three people who'd orchestrated her parents' deaths, manipulated her entire life, and believed they owned her future. They look smaller now, older, mortal. What happens to them? She asked. Prison, life sentences if the evidence holds, and it will hold. Sarah nodded slowly. And the contingencies they mentioned, the threats against Marcus and the others. We've been monitoring communications since you set up this meeting. The moment they mentioned contingencies, we started tracing their network. We've identified and secured 17 separate assets who were positioned to carry out those threats. They're all in custody. All of them? Every single one. For the first time in 72 hours, Sarah felt something in her chest unclench. The trials took 9 months. Sarah testified in closed hearings that lasted weeks, walking prosecutors through every detail of Kandahar, the hospital attack, Whitmore's operation, and the architect's manipulation. The evidence was overwhelming. The 3 architects, identified eventually as former CIA deputy directors who'd gone private sector after retirement, were convicted on multiple counts of conspiracy, murder, espionage, and a dozen other charges that carried sentences adding up to several lifetimes. Whitmore cut a deal and testified against them, which probably saved his life but destroyed whatever reputation he'd had left. Ashford did the same, ending up in witness protection somewhere Sarah would never know or care about. The contractors who'd survived were prosecuted individually. Some cooperated, some didn't. Commander Price ended up with reduced charges in exchange for testimony that helped dismantle Redstone Security Solutions entirely. Diane Cross was arrested for conspiracy and obstruction. Her bankruptcy had been orchestrated, her debt paid off specifically to position her as a compromised asset at Mercy Ridge. She'd known Sarah was there from the beginning. She'd fed information to Whitmore's network and facilitated Sarah's termination on orders from people she'd never met. She got 15 years. Marcus Holt was cleared of any wrongdoing after investigators proved his harassment of Sarah had been coerced through blackmail. The malpractice case from California was reopened and reviewed, revealing that the deaths had been caused by hospital equipment failures that had been deliberately covered up. Marcus was exonerated publicly and offered his position back at Mercy Ridge. He declined. Instead, he started working with a nonprofit that provided free medical training to combat veterans transitioning to civilian healthcare careers. He called Sarah 3 months after the trials ended. "I wanted to thank you," he said. "For what?" "For not letting me be the worst version of myself. I spent 3 months treating you like garbage because I was scared of losing everything. You had every reason to let me fail. You made your own choice when it mattered," Sarah said. "That's what counts." "What are you doing now?" he asked. Sarah looked around the office Crawford had given her at DIA headquarters. She'd accepted the position running medical intelligence operations, working to protect personnel who'd been targeted the way she had. "Making sure nobody else gets turned into someone else's weapon," she said. The recognition came quietly at first, then built into something Sarah hadn't expected. The soldiers she'd saved in Kandahar started showing up, not all at once, but steadily over months. Some wanted to thank her. Some just wanted to shake her hand. One of them, a staff sergeant named Rodriguez, who'd lost both legs in the ambush, started a veterans advocacy organization and asked Sarah to serve on the board. She accepted. Linda Cho sent her a letter, handwritten, 3 pages long, apologizing for everything she'd said at Mercy Ridge. Sarah read it twice and then filed it away without responding. Some apologies didn't need acknowledgement. They just needed to exist. The hospital itself became the subject of a federal investigation that exposed systemic corruption in how defense contractors had been positioning assets in medical facilities across the country. 17 hospitals were implicated. 43 people were arrested. The industry reformed itself quietly, new oversight procedures implemented, old networks dismantled. Sarah's name appeared in redacted portions of reports, but never in public. The official story credited federal investigators with uncovering the conspiracy. Ghost 6 remained classified. That suited her fine. 6 months after the last trial concluded, Sarah received an invitation to speak at a medical conference in Chicago. The topic was combat trauma and civilian transition. She almost declined, then reconsidered when she saw Marcus's name on the program as a co-presenter. The conference was at a downtown hotel. Hundreds of doctors and nurses and medical professionals who'd never seen combat but treated its aftermath every day. Sarah stood backstage while someone introduced her with a sanitized biography that left out everything that mattered. Then she walked out and looked at the audience, saw faces that reminded her of Linda and Greg and all the people at Mercy Ridge who'd judged her based on hesitation and fear. Saw people who'd probably never understand what it meant to drag 12 wounded soldiers through 16 hours of enemy territory. Saw people who needed to understand anyway. "I'm going to tell you about failure," she began. The audience shifted, probably expecting something inspirational. "I failed a drill at a civilian hospital because hearing a loud noise triggered combat trauma I hadn't processed. I froze for 10 seconds while everyone watched. My supervisor documented it as evidence I was incompetent. He was right about the freezing. He was wrong about everything else." She saw people leaning forward now. "I spent 3 months being humiliated by colleagues who thought I was weak. They weren't cruel people. They were scared people who'd never learned that strength looks different depending on context. In combat, strength is violence executed perfectly. In hospitals, strength is saving lives despite the fear. Both are valid. Both are necessary. And judging someone for not performing one kind of strength when they're built for another is how you lose people who could have been exceptional." Marcus was watching from the side of the stage. He nodded once. "The same skills that made me freeze in a drill made me the right person to be there when armed men took over that hospital. The same trauma that made my colleagues think I was a liability made me the only one capable of responding when real violence arrived. Context matters. Understanding matters. And if you're ever in a position to evaluate someone who seems broken, consider the possibility they're not broken at all. They're just carrying weight you can't see." She talked for 40 minutes. Told them about combat medicine and civilian transition and the gaps in healthcare that left veterans falling through cracks. Told them about recognizing trauma in colleagues and creating environments where people could be honest about their limitations without losing their careers. Told them everything except the classified parts. When she finished, the applause was sustained and genuine. Marcus came out for his portion and built on what Sarah had said, talking about his own failures and the blackmail that had almost destroyed him, and how second chances only matter if you actually change. Afterward, 3 people approached Sarah separately. The first was a young nurse who'd served in Iraq and was struggling with PTSD while working in a Denver emergency room. Sarah gave her Rivera's contact information and promised to make an introduction. The second was a hospital administrator who wanted to implement trauma-informed evaluation procedures for veteran staff. Sarah connected him with the nonprofit Marcus had started. The third was a military recruiter who asked if Sarah would consider speaking to new medical corps recruits about the realities of combat medicine. Sarah took his card and promised to think about it. She was walking out of the hotel when her phone rang. "Crawford." "You did good work today," the deputy director said. "You were watching? We stream these conferences for training purposes. Your talk is already being forwarded to every VA hospital in the country." Sarah didn't know what to say to that. "I have something for you," Crawford continued. "The investigation into the architect's operations uncovered files on your parents, your real parents, Jennifer Cates's parents." Sarah stopped walking. "They were exactly who you were told they were," Crawford said gently. "Your father was an investigative journalist. Your mother was a teacher. They died because your father was about to expose corruption that went all the way to Pentagon leadership. They were good people doing the right thing, and you are exactly like them." Sarah felt something crack in her chest. Not breaking, but opening. "Thank you," she managed. "The files are being delivered to your apartment. If you need time to process them..." "I don't need time. I need to keep working." "That's what I thought you'd say." Sarah hung up and stood on a Chicago sidewalk, while the city moved around her like a river flowing past a stone. She'd spent 3 years trying to be invisible. Spent 20 years being whoever other people needed her to be. Spent her entire life running from or toward violence, depending on who was giving orders. Now she was standing still, choosing her own direction, building her own identity out of pieces both given and earned. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Dinner with the nonprofit board tonight. You should come. They want to meet the woman who inspired the whole thing." Sarah smiled and typed back, "I'll be there." 3 months later, Sarah was in her office at DIA headquarters when Rivera knocked on the door. "We've got a situation," she said. Sarah looked up from the file she'd been reviewing. "What kind?" "Military medical personnel gone missing in Germany. 3 people in 2 weeks. Local investigators think it's connected to a defense contractor operating in the area. The pattern matches what we saw with Whitmore." "Another network?" "Looks like it. And they're asking for you specifically. They want the person who took down the architect." Sarah felt the familiar pull. The call to step back into violence and solve problems the hard way. Felt it and recognized it and made a choice. "Put together a team," she said. "But I'm going as an investigator, not an operator. We're doing this the right way. Evidence, warrants, prosecution." Rivera smiled. "You've gone soft." "I've gone smart. There's a difference." She worked the Germany case for 6 weeks, coordinating with international law enforcement and military investigators. They dismantled the network without firing a shot, arrested 14 people, and freed the missing personnel who'd been held for interrogation. Nobody died. Sarah considered that a success. The cases kept coming. She handled some personally, delegated others, built a department that specialized in protecting medical personnel from exactly the kind of exploitation she'd survived. The work was hard and frustrating, and sometimes felt like pushing water uphill. But it was hers. She chose it. And that made all the difference. On the 1-year anniversary of the Mercy Ridge Hospital attack, Sarah drove to Clearwater, Arizona. The hospital had invited her to a memorial ceremony honoring the civilians who'd been killed and the staff who'd survived. She almost didn't go. But Marcus called her the night before and said it mattered, so she went. The ceremony was in the hospital's main atrium. Families of the deceased sat in the front rows. Hospital staff filled the rest. Marcus gave a speech about trauma and healing. Diane Cross's replacement as administrator talked about implementing new security measures. Then they called Sarah to the stage. She walked up carrying the weight of everything that had happened in this building, the humiliation, the violence, the moment when she'd stopped running and started fighting back, looked out at faces she recognized and faces she didn't, started talking. "I worked here for 3 months. Most of you didn't know me. Some of you knew me and wished you didn't. I was the nurse who froze during drills and asked too many questions and didn't fit the normal pattern. I was the one you wanted gone." She saw Linda in the audience, crying quietly. "I don't blame you for that. You were responding to what you saw, and what you saw was someone who seemed broken. You weren't wrong. I was broken. Combat breaks you in ways that don't heal just because you take off the uniform. The question is whether breaking makes you weaker or just different." Sarah paused. "A year ago, people came into this hospital with weapons and bad intentions. They wanted to kill witnesses and destroy evidence and erase truth. They thought they could do it because they'd done it before. They were wrong. Not because of me, because of all of you. Every person who evacuated patients, who stayed calm under pressure, who chose to help instead of hide. You didn't need combat training to be brave. You just needed to be exactly who you already were." She saw Marcus nodding. "I left this hospital thinking I'd failed at being normal. Turned out I was never supposed to be normal. I was supposed to be effective. So were you. So is everyone who walks through those doors every day choosing to do hard work in difficult circumstances. You don't need to be Go 6, you just need to be yourself at your best. That's enough. It's always been enough." The applause started slowly, then built. Sarah walked off the stage and straight out to the parking lot where her car was waiting. She'd said what needed saying, didn't need to stay for the rest. She was getting in her car when someone called her name, turned around and saw Linda walking toward her. "Wait," Linda said. "Please." Sarah waited. Linda stopped a few feet away, clearly struggling with words. "I was terrible to you," she finally said. "I said things I can't take back. I judged you without knowing anything real about you, and then you saved my life anyway." "You already apologized," Sarah said. The letter was enough. "It wasn't. I need to say this to your face. I need you to know I understand what I did wrong, and I'm doing better now. I volunteer at a VA clinic. I'm learning to recognize trauma instead of judging it. I'm trying to be the person who would have treated you with respect instead of contempt." Sarah studied her for a moment. "That's good work," she said. "It doesn't fix what I did." "No, but it fixes what you'll do next. That matters more." Linda nodded, tears streaming down her face. Sarah got in her car and drove away from Mercy Ridge Hospital for the last time, watching it disappear in her rearview mirror like everything else she'd survived. 5 years later, Sarah sat in a congressional hearing room providing testimony on proposed legislation to protect military medical personnel from exploitation. She'd been invited as an expert witness, her identity still partially classified, but her experience lending weight to recommendations about oversight and accountability. A senator asked her what she thought was the most important change needed. Sarah looked at the committee and chose her words carefully.
Stop treating people like assets. We're not equipment to be deployed and stored and reactivated when convenient. We're human beings with trauma and skills and the right to choose our own paths. The military builds incredibly capable people. Then it breaks them and expects them to just blend back into civilian life without support or understanding. That's not a personnel management problem. That's a moral failure. The room was silent. So what do you recommend? Another senator asked.
Treat transitions like missions. Give them the same resources, the same attention, the same planning you'd give any military operation. Don't just discharge people with a handshake and expect them to figure it out. And when they struggle, don't judge them for being weak. Help them find contexts where their strength makes sense. The legislation passed 8 months later. Sarah's testimony was cited in the official record. Ghost 6 finally got recognized. Not as a warrior or a hero or any of the other labels people wanted to apply. As someone who'd survived being turned into a weapon and chosen to become something better. That was enough. 10 years after Kandahar, Sarah stood in front of a training class of newly enlisted combat medics and looked at faces that reminded her of herself at 19. Young, determined, carrying the weight of choices they hadn't fully understood yet. You're going to see things that change you, she told them. You're going to make decisions under pressure that haunt you later. You're going to save lives and lose lives and carry both experiences for the rest of your career. That's the job. The question is what you do with it afterward. She walked them through tactical medicine, trauma response, decision-making under fire. Taught them the skills that had kept her alive through Kandahar and every operation since. And at the end, she told them the truth nobody had told her. When you finish your service and transition back to civilian life, you're going to feel lost. People will judge you for skills they don't understand. You'll struggle with contexts that don't match your training. Some of you will think you're broken. You're not. You're just trained for situations most people never face. Find places where that training matters. Build communities that understand what you've been through. And when someone treats you like you're weak because you're different, remember, it's their limitation, not yours. One of the trainees raised her hand. What if we can't find those places? Sarah smiled. Then you build them. That's what I did. That's what you'll do too. She walked out of the training facility into sunlight that felt nothing like the desert heat of Kandahar or Arizona. This was Virginia in spring. Clean and fresh and full of possibilities that hadn't existed when she'd started this journey. Her phone buzzed. Marcus, now running a veterans medical network across 15 states. Board meeting next month. Need your input on expansion plans. Rivera, leading a DIA team in Eastern Europe. Found another network. This one's bigger. Could use your expertise. Hayes, teaching tactical medicine at Fort Bragg. New crop of medics graduating. You should come speak. Crawford, still running operations from DC. We've got a situation that needs your particular skill set. Interested? Sarah looked at the messages and felt the familiar pull in 4 different directions. Felt the weight of choices and the freedom to make them. She'd spent her entire life being pushed and pulled and manipulated by people who thought they knew better than she did about what she should become. Now she was standing still, looking at paths she could choose, and the only voice that mattered was her own. She responded to all 4 messages with variations of the same answer. I'll be there. Because that was the thing about strength that nobody had taught her until she'd learned it herself. It wasn't about being unbreakable. It was about choosing where to break and where to hold. About knowing when to fight and when to heal. About understanding that the same skills that made you dangerous could make you invaluable if you just found the right context. She'd been Ghost 6, the medic who wouldn't quit. She'd been Sarah Bennett, the nurse everyone wanted gone. She'd been Jennifer Cates, the child whose parents died for truth. Now she was just Sarah, building something that mattered out of all the broken pieces they'd tried to bury. The people who'd underestimated her were in prison or discredited or learning to do better. The people she'd saved were building lives that mattered.
And Sarah was finally, after 20 years of being whatever other people needed, becoming exactly who she'd chosen to be. That was justice. Not revenge, not vindication. Just the quiet satisfaction of standing in sunlight and knowing that every scar she carried had been earned in the service of something worth protecting. She put her phone away and started walking toward the parking lot where her car was waiting. Somewhere behind her, another generation of combat medics was learning to save lives under fire. Somewhere ahead, there were people who needed protecting, and systems that needed dismantling, and truth that needed exposing. And Sarah was ready for all of it. Not because she was unbreakable, because she'd learned that breaking wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of becoming something stronger,